La industria agrícola nacional se ve enfrentada a diversos desafíos: el cambio climático, el déficit hídrico, la disminución de la mano de obra, las nuevas exigencias de los consumidores, los movimientos sociales y la pandemia. En búsqueda de dar solución a estos problemas y desafíos, nace el Programa de Extensión e Innovación de UC Davis Chile. Basado en el exitoso sistema de extensión cooperativa de la Universidad de California y adaptado a las condiciones de nuestro país. El motor de este programa son problemas reales que afectan a productores y sus empresas, identificados con ellos en conjunto con académicos, investigadores y asesores. Buscamos las soluciones más apropiadas, facilitando su acceso y adopción. Lo complejo lo hacemos simple. Medimos los cambios para evaluar el beneficio económico, social o ambiental de estos. El programa promueve y fortalece una red de colaboración que permite enfrentar con éxito los actuales y nuevos desafíos, entre todos y para todos, y contribuye a asegurar la competitividad sostenible de la industria agrícola nacional, pero fundamentalmente, cambios en las personas y en sus relaciones, para que estos beneficios perduren en el tiempo. Extensión puede hacer la diferencia.
Somos el Centro de Innovación de la Universidad de California Davis en Chile, UC Davis Chile. La Universidad de California Davis es una de las grandes universidades públicas de Estados Unidos dedicada a entregar educación, investigación y servicio de excelencia a la sociedad. El 2015 iniciamos nuestras actividades en Chile y desde ese momento hemos buscado contribuir desde la investigación aplicada, la extensión tecnológica y la innovación al desarrollo y productividad del país, atendiendo principalmente a los desafíos de los sectores agroalimentario y medioambiental.
Desde nuestros primeros proyectos, enfocados en el sector vitivinícola, avanzando hacia requerimientos más amplios del sector agroalimentario y luego hacia iniciativas en medio ambiente, recursos hídricos, sustentabilidad, extensionismo, economía circular, calidad de aire, eficiencia energética, entre otros, hemos podido fortalecer el vínculo entre ciencia e industria en temáticas de gran relevancia tanto para Chile como para California, brindando soluciones tecnológicas basadas en ciencia, al mercado y a la sociedad.
one.
Hola, muy buenas
Hi,
tardes a todos
good
y a todas
afternoon,
desde
everyone,
Chile. Buenas,
here
buenos
from
días
Chile.
a nuestros
Good
participantes de
morning to our
California.
participants
Recuerden,
from
tenemos
California.
cinco horas de
Let's
diferencia entre California y
remind
ahora en Chile.
everyone we have 5 hour difference between
Y
California
feliz
and
de que nos puedan
Chile,
acompañar hoy día
and happy for
en
you
este
to join
seminario que
us
hemos llamado
today in
Water
this seminar
Centralized
that we
Data.
called
Y bueno, en este
Water
seminario
Centralized
internacional
Data
lo que
Management. And
hemos
in this
buscado
international
y lo que
seminar,
hemos
what
buscado
we've looked for,
conceptualmente
and
hoy
like
día
we've looked for
desde
all
el centro de UC Davis
initiatives
Chile
at the
se
UC
llama
Davis
intercambio de
Center, Chile,
experiencias,
is
ideas
to generate
con nuestros
experience
panelistas
exchange, idea
nacionales
exchange
y
with our national
internacionales.
and
Desde UC
international
Davis Chile
panelists.
estamos muy
From
contentos de
UC
haber
Davis,
querido
Chile,
convocar a
we are
distintos
happy
actores y
to
protagonistas
having
de la
called different
gestión del
actors and
recurso hídrico
protagonists
en
of
Chile,
water
UC y
management
California, quienes han
and water
escuchado
resource
más de una
management
nuestra
from
principal
UC Davis, Chile,
plataforma de conversación, que
whom
nos permitirá
have
principalmente
agreed to participate
una
in this
visión
platform to
sobre
mainly
la
have
experiencia,
a
sobre las
view
brechas,
on
sobre las
experience,
oportunidades,
on
sobre los
gaps,
aciertos que ha habido
opportunity,
aquí en California y
on
ojalá poder también generar
successes
esa
seen in
conversación
California,
a la
and to
situación
ideally
de
generate the
Chile,
conversation with the
considerando
situation
desde
today in Chile.
California, considerando
And we
que
hope
las
from
similitudes
California,
en muchos
considering
aspectos
similitudes
pueden
in
ser
many
experiencia
aspects,
para nuestro
can
país.
be
¿Mm?
as experience for our
Como les
country.
decía, la idea es
As
poder
I've said, the
tener
idea is to be able to have
esta instancia de compartir
this
experiencia con los
instance of
actores de
sharing
Chile en los
experiences with
avances,
Chilean
desafíos
actors of the
del estado
advances,
del arte a
challenges
California
of the
hoy.
state of
¿Cómo
the art of
estaba
how
California
California
años
is
atrás?
and how
¿Cómo vamos
California was
usando
years
gran
ago,
parte de la
and how
información para
we've
ir mejorando el
been seeing
futuro
great part of
de
the information to
Chile con
see
experiencias que
improving
probablemente
ones from the
como
future and
decíamos,
what
no
Chile and their
solamente con los
experience. And I
aciertos
said before, not
y
only
con los
with
errores. Yo creo que uno
the
también aprende mucho
successes, but
de
also
los errores
mistakes that
que se
one
habían
may
hecho en otros
learn of
países.
many of the
Acá
mistakes
la red a la que queremos
usually done in the
dirigir
country.
desde
Here,
acá
the
son
network that we want to
públicas,
reach today
empresas,
are public entities,
ONG S y
companies,
Universidades.
NGOs,
Somos
and universities,
parte
whom,
nosotros acá desde el
which
centro
here
moderado
from
del
the center
departamento
we've tried to
conjunta
work
y entre
in a
todos
joint
poder
fashion
tener una mejor
and
gestión
among
de
all
los
to have
recursos
better
hídricos en
management of
diversas
water
condiciones y además en
resources in
diversos
diverse
ámbitos.
conditions and in
Creo
different
que es muy
senses. I
importante
think
resaltar
it's
que
important to
UC Davis
note
Chile también hoy día es
that UC
parte
Davis
del
Chile today is
consorcio de
also
gestión de
part
recursos hídricos
of
de
the
la zona
consortium of
de la macrozona
water
centro-sur,
resources management of the
un proyecto
Center South
recientemente
macro zone, a
validado por Corfo este
recently
año, adjudicado por el
uh,
Corfo, donde también hay una
recent
oportunidad
project
para
by
agrupar distintas
Corfo to
visiones
group different
con un trabajo mucho más
visions with
técnico.
the
Y
more
hoy día
technical
nuestra
work behind them.
compartir
My idea is to
con este
share,
consorcio
just like in the
en esta actividad
consortium,
una
with
mirada de
this
inversión
activity,
sustentable,
a
comunitaria,
sustainable view,
amigable con el medio
community
ambiente,
view, friendly with
temas
the
que
environment,
también han sido muy
subjects that
importantes
I
en
know have
California
been of
debido
importance
a
in
un amplio
California
ecosistema que la
from
Universidad de
the
California
ecosystem
ha
which
también
the
favorecido
University of
en el
California has
estado
also
de
favored
California en Estados
in the
Unidos.
state of California in the
Este
United States.
la primera
This
actividad de un
is the first
ciclo de
activity
tres actividades que
of
permitirán
three
definir
activities
una
that
transformación
have as a
en
goal
temas de medio
to
ambiente,
offer
gestión
advances
hídrica,
in knowledge
gestión de
in
cuenca,
water
aguas
management,
subterráneas,
basin
temas de
management,
monitoreo, cambio
subterranean water
climático y además
monitoring
con todo
system,
lo que ello
climate change
conlleva
in general,
análisis de
which
datos,
all it
sequía,
considers data
incendios,
analysis, drought,
cuidado del agua, políticas
fires,
públicas, iniciativas
water care,
privadas,
public
conocimiento
policy, and private
académico,
initiative,
iniciativas
academic
técnicas,
knowledge, technical
tecnología que se pueden
initiatives,
implementar.
technologies that can
Bueno,
be incorporated.
también
Well,
queremos agradecer
we also wish to
a nuestros
thank
partners de este evento,
our
a
partners
Capta
to the
Hydro
event,
y a las
Hydro,
organizaciones que hoy día
and
nos han
the
apoyado de
organizations which
forma
have supported
estratégica.
us
Y en primer lugar, la
strategically.
Embajada de los
In
Estados
first
Unidos,
place, the U.S.
al
Embassy,
USDA,
to the
también
U.S.
en Chile le llamamos el USDA, que es el United States Department of
which is the
Agriculture,
United States
a
Department
Andes
of
Chile, al
Agriculture,
Consorcio
to Andes,
Tecnológico del
Chile,
Agua, a la Fundación Chile Lagos Limpios, al
to the
Ministerio
Lagos
de Obras
Limpio
Públicas y
Foundation,
muy en
the
especial
Ministry of
a la
Public
Dirección
Works,
General
and
de Agua,
specifically the
en
General
donde
Water
su director ejecutivo estará presente con
Department,
nosotros
whom Executive
moderando el
Director will
próximo
be
panel,
with us
al
moderating the
Ministerio de
next panel, to the
Agricultura, al
Ministry of
Ministerio y la
Agriculture,
Comisión Nacional
and
de
in the
Riego, y
ministry,
por
the
supuesto
National
al Corfo
Irrigation
y a la
Committee, and also
Agencia
Corfo,
Nacional de
and the
Investigación y
National
Desarrollo, ANI,
Agency of
que
Research and
facilitan
Development, the
es
ANI,
posible que
which have
UC
made
Davis
possible that
como
UC
universidad
Davis,
pueda
as
instalar
university,
este
can
centro de excelencia
install
en Chile hace ya
in
más de
their
6 años
Center of Excellence
y
in Chile for more than six
poder
years,
generar
and to
esta instancia, esta
generate
relación.
these
También agradecer a
instances of
a
relation.
nuestro partner
We
digital,
also
Centrum Eventos, Convenciones y Exhibiciones
appreciate
Virtuales,
our digital
y que
partner,
ha sido
Centrum eventos with virtual events, which have been of great use during the pandemic. We have to have gotten used to bonding with the local. I think we've lost many coffee breaks and the cookies in the in between, but it has facilitated for us to have better and better guests and people who not necessarily have to travel thousands of kilometers to be with us. So that is also
Bueno, nos
appreciated.
recordamos ya
We
desde el
also
programa
remember
operativo que
more
estuvimos
operational data where we have
desde
simultaneous
la India a
interpretation
español,
from
donde
English
pueden
into
acceder
Spanish,
con
where you can
tener
access
el
by
título
clicking
abajo Zoom,
upon the
como
icon
ven
at the
esto,
bottom of the Zoom
donde ustedes
and it like
eligen el lenguaje que les hace
icon
mayor
where you choose the
y
language that
recuerden que nos pueden
that
encontrar en redes sociales
best
como
suits
UC
you,
Davis
and
Chile.
you
Y
can
ahora
find
vamos
us
a
in
hacer
this social
una breve
networks
encuesta para
as
entender cuáles son
UC
los
Davis Chile
principales
and a brief
desafíos
survey to see what are the main
de la generación de
challenges
información
in the
sobre la
generation
gestión de
of
agua
useful
desde
information for
California
water
como
management from
audiencia.
your point of view as an
Esta
audience.
encuesta va a estar
This
abierta
survey will
hasta el
be
segundo
open
panel, donde vamos
until the
hacer
second
la revisión
panel
de los
where we will
resultados
show the results
de la audiencia que esté presente.
from the
Y
audience that
queremos
is
invitar
present.
a todos los
And we wish to
participantes a través de un
invite all
código QR que está
participants to
apareciendo
scan a
en la
QR
pantalla
code that
desde
is on
al
screen,
revés, ahí, al otro
uh,
lado.
the background
Ya,
there.
ahí se ve la
Here
pantalla
we
al revés.
see the screen.
Y desde sus celulares
And from your cell phones,
se abrirá una página web con una
we
encuesta
have a
y cuando
website.
salga la pregunta ustedes
And when the
pueden ahí
questions
ir
come out,
seleccionando sus
you could
alternativas. Si
select
tienen problemas para escribir
the
el código QR,
alternative. You have
pueden ingresar a
QR
la
codes,
página
difficulties, you can go into the
lido.com,
website, it's
lido.com
lido.com,
ingresar ahí con
and
el código
enter
hashtag UC
with the
Davis
hashtag
Chile
UC
en
Davis
el
code
grupo. El código,
all
como
together.
dije antes, este
And the
código va a
code,
estar
as I said
disponible
before,
hasta
this
el
code will
final
be
de este
available
panel.
until the end of
Bueno,
the
no
panel.
los aburro más
And I
con
won't
temas
bore you more with
operativos y dejo
operational
con
issues,
ustedes
and I leave
a
you now
Oscar
with
Cristi, como dije antes,
Oscar
director
Cristi, as
general
I
de Agua
said,
del
General
Ministerio de
Director of
California,
Water of the
quien
Ministry of
moderará
Public Works, whom will
este panel con
moderate
nuestro keynote
our first
speaker,
panel with our
Oscar.
keynote speaker. So, Oscar,
Toda la
I
audiencia
leave
para ti.
you. The audience is yours.
Gracias, Mauricio.
Thank you,
¿Se me escucha bien?
Mauricio. Can you hear me well? Yes?
Entiendo que se escucha bien.
I understand that you hear me well enough. Very good.
Eh, Gracias por
Thank you
invitarnos
for
a
inviting
participar
us to
en este
participate
panel,
in this panel,
que para nosotros es
which for us
muy importante porque
becomes very
el tema de
important
la
because the
información
subject of
es uno de los grandes
information
desafíos que tiene la
is one of the
Dirección del
large
Agua,
channels that the General Water Department
el
has.
manejo de datos,
Data
la generación
management,
de datos,
generating data.
es un elemento
It
fundamental,
is
más
a
aún entre
fundamental
las
element. It is
obligaciones de la
even one of
Dirección de
the
Agua,
mandates of the
de acuerdo
Water
a normas legales, Código de Agua, nos
Department,
compete a
which
la
is
Dirección General
according
de
to
Agua
our
llevar todo el
mandates
registro
that we have to
de la
carry out
información
full
hídrica del
registry
país, de la
of the
infraestructura hídrica,
country's
etcétera.
water infrastructure, etc.
También en la Mesa Nacional del Agua,
Likewise,
que
in the national
formada
water
por presidente
table made up
Piñera ya hace
by
2 años,
Piñera,
que
President
reúne
Piñera
a
2
un
years
grupo muy
ago,
transversal de
that
personas,
brings a transversal
el
group
tema
of
de la
people.
información ha
The
sido un
subject of
tema de
information has
debate
been a
y de
debate, an
propuesta.
issue of debate and
En
proposal.
particular, hay toda una
Particularly,
propuesta de
there is
nueva
a whole
institucionalidad para el
proposal
agua en
of
el
a new
país, que
institutionality
uno de
for
los
water in the
elementos
country, which has
fundamentales
as one of the
es
main
una
elements
división
a
de la
division
información hídrica que aúne los
of
esfuerzos de las
water
diferentes
information that
instituciones en el
brings
país
efforts of
que
the different
generan
institutions of the country and
data,
generate
información
data
sobre el tema.
information for the subject.
También la Dirección General de Agua está muy
Likewise,
involucrada
the
en
General
el plan de
Water
gestión por cuenca.
Department is
Uno
involved
de los elementos primarios es la modelación y la generación
modeling into
de
the
nueva data.
generation of new data.
También es un placer en lo
It is also
particular
a pleasure, or
estar aquí
particularly,
junto a
to be
UC
here
Davis, donde tantos
together with
profesionales en materia
UC
hídrica
Davis, with well,
se han
so many
formado
professionals
y
in
donde
water have been
específicamente el tema
formed,
del agua hemos leído
where
tantos
those
papers y tantos artículos
whom
de
dedicate to water have read so
extraordinarios
many
profesores
papers
de
and
UC Davis en
articles
moderado.
from extraordinary
Y también y
professors
sobre
at
todo
UC
tener a
Davis,
dos
and also
connotados
to have
speakers de
two noted
California,
Californian
donde
speakers with
California
us,
siempre ha sido un
where
referente para
California has
Chile
always
porque
been a reference
compartimos
for Chile because we
un tema
share
similar
a
en
similar
cuanto a los derechos de agua, la
regarding
calidad del
water
uso del agua,
rights, the property of
y
water
siempre estamos
rights,
aprendiendo de
and we are
California en
always
materia de
learning from
infraestructura,
California
de
regarding
gestión,
infrastructure,
de instrumentos
management
económicos para hacer
instruments,
frente a la
economic
sequía, que es algo
instruments to
que es
face
muy
droughts.
relevante
So it
poder
becomes very relevant
escuchar
to
la experiencia
always
de
hear
California
the
porque la
experience
tenemos
from California
con
because we
muchísimo
take
interés en
it
el país.
with great
Y en
interest
esta
in the
ocasión
country.
tenemos
And on
dos
this occasion, we
panelistas de
have
lujo,
two deluxe
eh,
panelists,
Greg Gearhart,
Greg
que es
Greyhart,
director adjunto
whom
de
is
la
the
Dirección
joint
de Recursos
director of
Hídricos del Estado de
the
California,
Water Control Board of the
y
Californian
Kamyar
State,
Guivetchi,
and Kamyar
que es
Guivetchi,
gerente de la
whom
Dirección
is
Estatal de
manager
Gestión
of the
Integral del
state
Agua,
Department of
perteneciente al Departamento de
Comprehensive Water
Recursos
Management of
de
the
California,
Water Resource
que nos van
Department
a
from
estar
California,
hablando
whom will
justamente
be speaking
de cómo se pueden
specifically of how
sumar
we
nuestros
can
esfuerzos para hacer una
bring together efforts for adequate water management. According to the program that I have been receiving by the organizers, a very detailed program, we should have started at 3:10. We are 5 minutes behind. And the proposal is that each one of our speakers, starting with Greg, have 15 minutes for their presentations, then have a 20-minute session for questions and answers. So to not go further, I invite Greg so that we can formally start if he wishes with his presentation. Greg?
Thank you. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here today and to be working alongside the government of Chile, the UC Davis folks that organize this, and mostly it's an honor to present again our story about our journey towards a better data infrastructure at the California Water Boards. I am going to share my presentation. Hopefully that shows up. So as mentioned, I am the Deputy Director at the California Water Boards organization for essentially data is my title. It's a long name of the office and I'll get into what we do, but I'm going to do a couple of things with this presentation. I'm going to share the story of the California Water Boards as we have embarked on this journey of making open data a central driver for everything that we do. But also I'm going to share a little higher level of a view that I've had the pleasure and honor of being a part of called a project called the Internet of Water that has spanned across the country to make sense of this sort of open data and water data infrastructure and to develop it. This is a very iterative process. I like the idea of talking about mistakes. We've made plenty of mistakes in our journey to do this. I'll try to highlight a couple, but we can talk about that in the questions and answers too. For orientation, there's 10 boards in California that are called the water boards. 9 of these are regional boards. They have hydrologic basins as boundaries. They span the whole state of California and they directly deal with water quality. They don't deal with water rights. They don't deal with drinking water. These are 9 regional boards that directly deal with water quality. The 10th board is the state board, and the state board is has the whole state as jurisdiction. It also has water rights, drinking water, provides financial assistance. This is a busy slide with lots of data. I'm going to make my slides available to anyone who wants them. But the information on this slide summarizes how big of an organization we are. I'll highlight that there's about 2,500 employees at the water board. We have over 50 programs, lots of different financial assistance projects where we give money out in loans and grants, and we are a fee-based organization, so we get our money, most of our money for everything is paid for by fees from the people that we work with and regulate. One of the core principles that you'll hear about with the joint presentation with Kamyar is about open data.
Es sobre datos abiertos. Para los que no conocen datos abiertos, este es un resumen de lo que es, qué signifique. Es esencialmente es convertir datos leíbles, simplificadas para el contexto, es reutilizable y manejada. Y tiene un componente de administración. Así que los datos abiertos son de base del trabajo hecho en California, al menos en los últimos 5 años, y trabajo mío y de Kamyar y de otros. Se trata de transformar en organizaciones y transformar organizaciones. Quizás lo escucharon antes, pero creemos que infraestructura de datos de agua es infraestructura de agua. Así que invertir en datos de agua como si fuesen cañerías, reservorios y represas es tan importante para el avance de la confianza del público a nosotros para manejar todo el agua del estado de California. Una de las áreas en que me enfocaré es cómo desbloquear datos. Muchos quizás entiendan que una organización grande de gobierno como nosotros ha usado datos en la última década. Ahora tiene lo que llamaremos una infraestructura de legado. Muchas bases de datos se construyeron hace 10 años atrás. Estos sistemas de legado no se diseñan liberar datos fácilmente, así que gastamos mucha energía en California, en mi organización, buscando destacar y desbloquear estos flujos de datos para llevarlos a acceso público y el acceso público es nuestro punto final ideal. Así que características del directorio, perfil de nosotros, tenemos más de 40 aplicaciones de base de datos de empresas y corporaciones. Tenemos datos que cubre temas de calidad de agua, derechos de agua, agua potable, asistencia financiera y otros temas. Tenemos tanto dato programática que se escribiría como datos sobre las instalaciones, actividades, las inspecciones realizadas, los permisos entregados, esos datos programáticos y también una gran categoría de datos que nos referimos como ambiental, y esto caracteriza agua superficial, agua subterráneo, uso de agua y conservación de agua, temas del estilo. Así que cuando las personas preguntan de nuestros datos, hay tanto interés de datos programáticos por algunos que muchos de nuestros grupos públicos que nos ven y se asocian con nosotros quieren saber tanto de nuestro dato programático, de nuestros datos ambientales. Tenemos datos disponibles en dos formas básicas. Estos links son en vivo al sitio web. Uno es un catálogo de datos que describe todo lo que he dicho en mayor detalle. El otro son los recursos de datos abiertos que hemos publicado y escucharemos más de la ley que lo requiere con Kamyar, pero los recursos abiertos son 46 set de datos donde colocamos todos nuestros datos de derecho de agua ahí, que es enorme en realidad. Esta es una diapositiva que da un poco miedo y esta describirá el ambiente que nuestra tecnología de información y mundo, como ellos ven a nuestro mundo de datos de agua. Así que cada uno de estos diagramas delata es una base de datos de algún. Puede que ni siquiera sea un base de datos, puede que sea uno ideal, pero hay una visión de hace 5 años de reunir todos los datos en el lugar adecuado para que los bases de datos vivan en silos y familias de silos, como se relacionen entre sí, se describió con muchas flechas. Esto es un esquema muy útil para mostrar cuán difícil es para las organizaciones como nosotros, y creo que muchos tienen organizaciones del estilo con diferente escala para desbloquear algunos de estos elementos de datos que están atrapados en estos latas silo. Vivimos y morimos al ver el mundo a través de los datos. Aquí tenemos un dibujo describiendo nuestro ciclo de datos. Mejorando el flujo de datos significa mejorar caminos críticos y mejorar maneras estratégicas para mejorar el flujo de datos. Los datos son recolectados por un impulsador y hace eventualmente llega a una pieza de información al final de este esquema. Y en el camino hay piezas y elementos que nuevamente esto es conceptual, no real, pero estos son excelentes maneras de pensar en cómo desbloquear el dato. Es desagregar los elementos y verlos por uno. Esto es un pantallazo de web de dato abierto para publicar recursos con ejemplos de los tipos de recursos que hemos enlistado aquí. Otro trabajo clave es construir capacidad. Va con mejorar flujos de datos, pero también significa que mejoramos a nuestras personas. Al final del día trabajamos con personas. Todas nuestras organizaciones son impulsadas por personas y construir capacidad significa capacitación y ofrecer lo que decimos una estrategia de eh, capacidad de aplicación de datos, de lo que llamamos, por ejemplo, el curso capacitación de informática en agua para lograr los 4 objetivos. Esto es a un trabajo en progreso relativamente nuevo, pero es muy popular y hace buen trabajo. Una cosa realizada es crear un curso para nuestra fuerza de trabajo que es abierta a todos, para los que quieran usar sus módulos. Es un programa de alfabetización digital. Tenemos a Ryan and Rich abajo a la derecha que hicieron un curso para R para científicos de datos y recursos hídricos. Es un curso abierto para todos, es un curso en línea. Así que un buen proyecto realizado, muy popular. Quizás como muchos saben, muchos de nuestros empleados vienen con habilidades de codificación en R, o al menos la capacidad del aprendizaje de R rápidamente, y nos hemos enfocado en este como herramienta principal. También hacemos mucho compromiso con datos. Significa que trabajamos con personas para que entiendan cómo usamos los datos, para qué se usará, qué es bueno de él. Trabajamos con personas del consejo como el público. Estas son descripciones de las actividades con el mundo exterior hacemos cosas como desafíos de datos o hackatones o datatones o otros tipos de eventos de compromiso en temas particulares, como por ejemplo de basura y otros. También trabajamos internamente con nuestros programas y esto no es separado de sí. A menudo hay un camino iterativo donde descubrimos que al trabajar con el público quieren más datos de agua bebible. Trabajamos con el programa de agua potable para ver si logramos compromiso y es un enlace reiterativo. La usamos como herramienta de reclutamiento para atraer personas al grupo de trabajo y en nuestros consejos le gustan y vienen y trabajan para nosotros por lo mismo. Este es un esquema que trabajamos en conjunto con algunos socios para hacer estos eventos de compromiso. Tenemos facilitadores pagados e ilustraciones para los proveedores que ofrecen artefactos que podamos llevar adelante para contar la historia de la excelente colaboración y asociación que ocurre con nuestros eventos. Estos son los socios con los cuales hemos trabajado. Mucho podrían existir hoy en día. Uno de los temas más populares trabajado es basura. Es un gran problema en el mundo, como también en California. Y en particular, esto tiene un elemento de datos que es muy desafiante. No mucha información sobre basura es recolectada y datos recolectados a veces no son interoperables y utilizables, así que hemos dedicado muchos eventos donde muchas personas vienen a ser voluntarios con sus tiempos para mejorar los recursos de basura y ha sido gran éxito. Ahora, eso fue la historia de California y lo que llevo trabajando con MyShot tratando de mejorar la cultura y la infraestructura de datos en los consejos de agua en California. El Internet de agua de hace 5 años fue un proyecto para ver la misma idea en todo el país. Es aspiracional. De muchas maneras hemos dicho que si funciona el Internet de agua, desaparecerá, nadie sabría que existió, producirá una infraestructura de agua que opera, no como muy diferente a los datos del clima del mundo, donde es altamente estructurado, hay muchas normas hechas de mover datos para que tengamos acceso de nuestros teléfonos a información climática. Sería más bien un ejemplo ideal aspiracional de cómo podría verse la infraestructura de agua para algunos temas. Así que este proyecto tendrá transformación, pero es emocionante y trata de actualizar los fuentes de datos abiertos de agua. Un proyecto que trabajamos fue asociarnos con el Internet de agua sobre un problema de floramiento algal dañina, tratando de lograr compromiso comunitario. Hemos tenido mucho florecimiento algal, causan muchos impactos, causan muerte a las mascotas y salud e impacto, como impactos financieros y mucho estrés en California. Por lo tanto, los tribus son las comunidades más vulnerables que sufren impacto. Así que tratamos de mejorar nuestra infraestructura de datos al trabajar con Internet de agua. Hay gran ejemplo de cómo documentar datos. La modernización alrededor de este proyecto a la derecha, el link está disponible al hacer clic, pero también podría ver el Internet de agua. Hay un webinar que aparecerá en varios días. Otro excelente proyecto del Internet de agua es GeoConnect. Es esencialmente tratan de construir un sistema persistente identificador que resuelva el problema de URLs para características hidrológicas que desaparezcan. Tenemos muchos tipos de defensores de estas características y que cambian URLs o desaparezcan. Nuestra capacidad de integrar datos alrededor de la fábrica del terreno desaparece. Así que este proyecto con USG y el Internet de agua trata de construir una tela más resiliente de características hidrológicas ambientales que permitirían a alguien de construir todos sus datos sobre arriba de esta tela. Así que es un proyecto emocionante, no hay tiempo de hablarlo mucho, pero está disponible para investigación propia y al final los consejos de agua utilizan los datos para impulsar los datos realizados. Hemos hecho un reporte de rendimiento de los últimos 14 años. Algo de la información, tipo de información presentada son datos sobre nuestros sobre flujos sanitarios. Es cuando sistemas de recolección de agua servida tienen problema y hay fuga de agua servida hacia el medio ambiente. Así que estas cantidades regionales de la izquierda y los datos quedan disponibles como una visualización en vivo interactivo y un panel que nos permite contar historias en el tiempo. Esto sería un ejemplo de los datos que tenemos disponibles para este programa. Nuevamente hay cientos de diferentes reportes que resumen diferentes tipos de actividades en California pero esta en particular es interesante porque tiene buen impacto comunitario y sobreponer y comenzar a entender cómo afecta al público. Los escapes de agua sanitario y agua residual es mucho trabajo que hacemos sobre igualdad racial y igualdad de uso de aguas en particular. Esto significa que identificar a las comunidades más vulnerables y centrarse en ellos para asegurar que se elevan a ellos. Al elevarse a ellos, se elevan todos los elementos. Así que el escape de aguas sanitarias es otro tema de esto. También tenemos estos reportes de calidad que les mostraré, pero es un mapa de historial vivo que verán en un minuto que revisa la historia del río y algo que Comité Regional Hunt es donde está el lago Tahoe y es la historia que hicieron para mejorar calidad de agua en ese río. Aquí hay otro ejemplo de mapas historiales. Tenemos muchas historias de calidad de agua que se quieren contar y es importante que nosotros podamos ofrecer una capacidad de hablar hacia los resultados de mejorar agua en realidad en California. Y detendré aquí mi presentación.
Gracias, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Aún no veo
I still haven't seen
esperar
questions come in. Maybe we can
la
wait
presentación
for Kamyar's
siguiente,
presentation, the next presentation maybe,
de Kamyar, y entonces ahí ver
and
si
then
un
see
grupo
if
que lo
we have a group of questions that may come in.
Si te parece, Kamyar,
If you want,
puedo
Kamyar,
comenzar con
could
tu
you
presentación.
want to start with your presentation?
Certainly, Oscar. Thank you. And
Por
welcome,
supuesto, Oscar, gracias. Bienvenidos a todos. Buenos días a todos en California y buenas tardes a nuestros colegas en Chile. Kamyar Guivetchi, trabajo con el Departamento de Recursos Hídricos y nos hemos involucrado en los últimos 5 años y más hacia construir un portal de agua abierta y plataforma en el estado de California y estoy feliz de tener esta oportunidad de compartir con ustedes el trabajo hecho. La manera en que quisiera realizar algo así es poder que revisen y darles revisión de nuestro revista de implementación. Así que buscamos un mapa historial en vivo, como Greg les acaba de mostrar un ejemplo, y esta nos cuenta una historia de implementación en el esfuerzo de California para datos de agua abierto. Antes de entrar a la parte de datos, quiero establecer el contexto porque creo que es lo que es el gran impulsador y motivación. En California, como en Chile, el agua se trata de extremos, el extremo de lo húmedo y de lo seco, y el cambio climático hace estos más consecuenciales. Otro desafío enfrentado aquí en California será la manera altamente descentralizada del manejar y gobernar el agua, y esta es principalmente en base geográfica, como también nuestros sectores de agua múltiple. Y cada una de nuestras instituciones y cada uno de nuestros sectores de agua tienen su propio silo de datos e información. Y para realmente de ponerse a la altura del desafío del cambio y el trabajar hacia futuro más adaptativo y resiliente, debemos y se hace esencial de unir los hilos de datos y lograr a nuestros sectores de agua del trabajar en conjunto de manera más efectivo. Por lo tanto, este esfuerzo de información de agua abierto en California, como mencionó Greg, es una infraestructura fundacional y de base para que necesitemos. Así que lo que quisiera hacer es darle una breve revisión de la revista de implementación y se los invito después de que visiten este sitio y realmente entren a los detalles. Por lo tanto, nuevamente, debido a los extremos en la cual vivimos, fue durante nuestra sequía del año múltiples en la cual la legislatura gubernamental pasó leyes nuevas para desarrollar una acta transparente de agua abierto, o se llama AB 75, 1755. Y más de lo que más he visto en mi carrera y recursos hídricos, el Departamento de Recursos Hídricos ha tratado a traer datos agua y datos ecológicos para hacer más accesible, para que puedan hacer decisiones críticas de agua. Las agencias estatales, una de las cuales es el Consejo Estatal de Agua que Greg Earhart, la cual participa, el Departamento de Recursos, el Departamento de Peces y Vida Silvestre, el Consejo de Agua, el Consejo de Monitorización de los Deltas, la Oficina de Planificación e Investigación y otras se han asociado. Nos llamamos la agencia y el equipo de agencias asociados y hemos trabajado en los últimos 5 años para realmente construir. Yo creo que una muy buena pieza de base bastante buena. Ahora fuimos afortunados que en el momento en que se nos dirigió comenzar a trabajar, la Agencia de Recursos Naturales de California, en la cual mi departamento pertenece, y la Agencia de Operaciones Gubernamentales, o GABAPS, comenzó ya a desarrollar portales de datos abiertos. Y más que crear otra pieza de tecnología o arquitectura de datos, decidimos tomar un abordaje de perspectiva de federación para reunir estas potentes portales de datos abiertos. Y ahora esto nos entrega la oportunidad de realmente dar y enlazar los portales de datos abiertos hacia el futuro. Ahora mencioné a la Agencia de Recursos Naturales y el portal visto a la derecha de este mapa de historias, que es el sitio web activo para los recursos naturales y su portal de recursos abiertos. Y estos son agrupaciones tópicos de datos. Tenemos presentaciones que destacan en realidad cómo los datos ayudan a hacer también otros información de datos asociados. Aquí tenemos el portal de datos abiertos GovOps. Aquí nuevamente tenemos su sitio web y trabajar en conjunto. Hemos ahora comenzado a confederar datos de múltiples agencias estatales como múltiples agencias federales. También el equipo de agencias, asociación de agencias, trabajó extensivamente para ayudar a crear lo que se llama el Consorcio de Datos de Agua de California. Este consorcio es único en que agencias estatales, académicas, organizaciones sin fines de lucro, utilidades de agua, empresas de utilidades de agua, y esta es una asociación pública privada que se expande nuestras oportunidades para traer más datos reunidos y hacer asequible para la comunidad de datos de agua California, para que esta de la derecha sea el sitio web del consorcio, y el consorcio ahora está comprometida en múltiples proyectos piloto que todos ayudamos a avanzar. Reunido un plan estratégico para este esfuerzo de datos abiertos en agua y también incluye 4 metas compartidas que harán datos útiles y realmente usados para el manejo de agua en California. Por lo tanto, para hacer los datos más suficientes, hemos comenzado a desarrollar inventorios, catálogos de nuestros datos ecológicos y de agua en múltiples agencias estatales y federales. ¿Vieron en algún detalle de Greg Gearhart cuántos datos solo un departamento o agencia estatal logra manejar y serán responsables por? Multipliquen este por veces y lo que trabajaremos es crear un catálogo de datos federado para poder ofrecer acceso a través de nuestros silos institucionales del sector de agua. Así que a la fecha tenemos 10.700 set de datos de agua críticos y visualizaciones de datos que se han preparado y publicado en esta plataforma de datos abiertos. Y en esta página, en agosto del 2020, hicimos solo una única búsqueda en datos de agua subterráneo y recibimos 664 datos o más datos de estas agencias. Así que una de las cosas en la cual trabajamos también es asegurar que esto solo sea una compilación de datos por tener datos, sino que tiene la ayudar a usuarios de datos a tomar decisiones críticas. Y al realizar aquello nos asociamos con la Universidad de California y su iniciativa de agua para el preparar un informe llamado Datos para la toma de decisión de agua. Les estimulo que la revisen. Se trata del tener casos de uso como el centro de la decisión en cómo compilar y organizar nuestros datos. También, como he mencionado, incluimos páginas de métricas y despliegues para poder soportar este esfuerzo. Como mencionó Greg Gearhart, el compromiso comunitario es crítico para un esfuerzo de datos, nuevamente datos con el propósito del hacer trabajar estos datos. Y lo que vemos a la derecha es el sitio web del Internet de Agua que Greg Gearhart nos en sección previa vieron al consorcio de datos de agua y su sitio web. Estos son colaboraciones efectivas y redes efectivas para datos abiertos y nuestro esfuerzo de California ha aprendido extensivamente tras colaborar con ellos. Por lo tanto, continuamente estamos agregando sets de datos adicionales. Buscamos mejorar nuestras normas de metadatos y la manera en que datos se describan para que usuarios puedan hacer un uso más efectivo de aquel dato. Y buscando hasta el futuro, queremos asegurarnos que las personas continúen usando nuestros datos e invitamos a ustedes y otros de vivir nuestros portales, de que nos den algo de retroalimentación de cómo podemos mejorar para hacer su- sus decisiones de toma, decisiones de manejo de agua más efectivas. Para más información, los invitamos a visitar el portal, la página de datos Open Data y les estimulo que se registren a los listados de nosotros lo que llamamos el esfuerzo AB 1755 con el correo de la pantalla como el consorcio de datos de agua y el Internet de agua. Y al final de la revista implementación hemos compilado todo URL que hemos tenido para hacer más fácil acceder. Buscamos una expectativa a nuestra colaboración continua con ustedes de buscar un día en que tengamos un portal federado de datos abiertos entre Chile y California. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, gracias, Kamyar. Muy buenas las dos presentaciones. Tenemos algunas
Thank you,
preguntas.
Kamyar. Very good both presentations. We have some questions now for our speakers.
Una de ellas,
One of them,
quizás comenzando por
maybe starting with Greg, could be
es en relación
is related more towards the size of the water board. Specifically, someone asks of the 2,500 employees, which a quite significant number to be considered. And the question is if this was born as so, or it has been increased or grown in time associated to the water crisis seen in California. So, Greg, I don't know about this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We have changed our
Una
organizational
muy buena pregunta. Hemos cambiado nuestro tamaño de organización en el tiempo. No necesariamente atribuiría directamente esta crisis en el agua. Adquirimos la decisión de agua potable de otra agencia estatal hace unos 7 años. Esta trajo una cantidad significativa a empleados nuevos y una nueva visión. Muchas oficinas que trabajan con agua potable en California hemos tenido otros crecimientos programáticos y relaciona con ofrecer y asegurar agua segura, potable para personas en California, y esto se relaciona con la crisis de agua. También hemos tenido crecimiento en nuestras organizaciones debido a nuevos programas como el programa Cannabis en California. Debimos desarrollar rápidamente una nueva estructura de permisos y autorización para ofrecer visualización regulatoria a aquellos que quieran legalmente cultivar cannabis en California. Así que ambas cosas, tres cosas, fueron las áreas de mayor crecimiento que pueda pensar de manera inmediata. Es una buena pregunta, no fuimos tan grande y estamos luchando con el tamaño de empleados como también la cantidad de dinero distribuido a las personas.
Gracias, Greg. Kamyar, hay una
Thank you,
pregunta.
Greg. Kamyar, there's another question that comes in. A subject that you've mentioned is the catalog, the data catalog, or the information catalog. And the question is specifically when we talk about information or water data, it may be many types of information that may exist. So what counsel would you give to start this catalog off, understanding that in the catalog we will have to agree of what's most relevant and what is the most important information, and maybe where we should start with. In the projects that are being worked in Chile, also in projects that are being elaborated, we talk about a catalog that will be made up and where we will establish what's the information that has to be collected and to be delivered. But according to your experience, what would be the most basic criteria to generate this information catalog? First, basically, and then growing capabilities or expansion capabilities.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think it's very important, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, that we develop data catalogs and data information systems that bridge
Que reúnan nuestro set de datos institucionales y nuestros sectores de agua. Reconocemos en California para cumplir con el desafío del cambio y otros desafíos, debemos lograr que de agua trabajen en conjunto. Hasta ahora, nuestros gerentes y de agua subterránea, nuestros calidad de agua por lejos han trabajado en áreas respectivas y en silos, y debemos realmente usar datos integrados y sistemas de información para el comenzar compartir la información que necesitaremos para poder llegar a la. Nosotros creemos que la escala y actividades a nivel de watershed son de gran importancia porque en milenios el ciclo de agua y la manera en que cómo funciona evoluciona naturalmente y nuestras actividades humanas e institucionales en muchos casos han disrumpido y fragmentado el manejo de estos sistemas naturales. Así que yo estimaría desarrollar catálogos de datos que realmente reúnan datos de múltiples sectores de agua y instituciones de agua y usar casos de uso para realmente enfocar cuáles son las decisiones claves que necesitarán hacerse para planificar e implementar proyectos de infraestructura que se estimen importante en Chile.
Gracias, Kamyar. Aquí hay una pregunta para Greg y para Kamyar que podrían contestar, quizás comenzando por Greg y después complementando.
First starting with Greg and Kamyar complement upon is what has been the influence of the technology developed in Silicon Valley in the management of the water management information. If you want, we can start with Greg.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Excelente pregunta, gracias. El ciclo vital de datos que he hablado de cómo recolectamos datos, donde almacenemos datos y después cómo lo hacemos asequible, cada elemento se ha afectado por los avances de tecnología del mundo y en el caso del Valle Silicona en particular. Una de las áreas que viene a mente es que hemos movido muchos de nuestros sistemas de datos de legado hacia un ambiente de nube. Tenemos más que hacer, pero esto definitivamente es un aspecto de disrupción positiva que la hace ser más asequible para conexiones de máquina a máquina, así que estos interfaces de aplicación e interfaz, estas conexiones de máquina a máquina y la inteligencia artificial tienen la capacidad de convertir este ciclo vital hacia un flujo rápido de datos hacia una aplicación. Es un área donde los avances en Valle Silicon nos han ayudado. También hemos visto desarrollos interesantes con tecnología de sensores en California y en el mundo e intentamos usar esto en nuestra organización. No hacemos muchos sensores, hacemos que otros lo hagan. Hay muchas asociaciones que estén en juego que toman ventaja de ese gran avance de tecnologías de sensores. Y gracias, Craig. Creo que lo cubriste. Yo notaría únicamente que quizás 30, 40 años atrás, la forma de abordar y lograr reunir datos es construir una base de datos centralizado y tratar de aspirar la mayor cantidad de datos posible. Pero lo que hizo esto fue desconectar los datos de los proveedores de datos, quienes son los mejores equipados para entender y manejar datos. Y a menudo lo que sucedería es que los datos en estos bases de datos centralizados serían desactualizados y no serían de tan utilidad. La tecnología que disponemos hoy es porque hemos sido capaces de federar múltiples portales y sets de datos institucionales y como también la nube, como mencionó Greg. Así que creo que es la manera en avanzar, ya que ofrece máxima flexibilidad y involucra a muchas más personas, compromete e involucra a más personas. Como han visto en Chile, sí que tenemos al menos en California, las personas quienes desarrollan o recolectan datos y lo manejan, son muy protectores de estos datos. Y es difícil de lograr que todos estén de acuerdo en un único software de gestión de datos o tecnología único. Y la tecnología actual nos ha ayudado a superar aquello y ahora podemos enfocarnos en realidad en buscar datos, hacerla asequible y después organizar datos en estos casos de uso que sean tan importantes en la toma de decisión.
Gracias. Nos quedan unos minutos para una última pregunta.
Thank you. We have minutes for some final questions related to the last one that you've commented on multiple inclusions that generates data and how these can be integrated. It is a reality that in the country we in Chile live, we have many public agencies which generate data around water use. We also have private organizations, not only the user organizations, and that this debate has always been if it has been necessary to integrate or generate only one large instance that generate data, or an instance that could be coordinate or may coordinate the different data generators. It is in this scheme to maintain those who generate data and looking for a way to integrate them. I would like to know of your experience of how you integrate the public with the private, if there is an agency whom determines the standard of the information that is going to be raised into the system, uploaded into the system, if there are some standards for the private country for the private parties that must comply so that the information delivered have certain validation, true validation. Maybe to ask and start with Kamyar and finish with Greg, what would be your reaction to a question like this?
Well, I think Greg really
Bueno, yo
touched
creo
on
que
it in
Greg
his
lo
presentation.
mencionó en detalle en su
And it is as
presentación.
much about
Que
people
datos
and
se trata de
processes than
personas
it
y
is
procesos,
as it is
tanto
technology.
en como
I
lo
think
es de
sometimes we
tecnología.
tend to
Y yo creo que a
focus
veces
on the
tendemos a
technology
sobreenfocarnos
at
en la
the expense
tecnología
of the
al
people
costo de
capacity
construir
and
capacidad en
change our
personas
business
y
processes
cambiar nuestros
to really
procesos de negocio
support
para
and empower
realmente
the
ofrecer soporte y
ability to
empoderar
use
la capacidad
the data
del usar
effectively.
los
So
datos
I think the
efectivamente.
California
Así
Water
que
Data
creo que
Consortium that
el
I
consorcio de
described
datos de
is
agua de
a very
California que he
great
descrito
example of
es
a
un
public-private
gran
partnership
ejemplo de
in
una
California.
asociación
It's
público-privada
very
en
unique
California,
because the state
algo
doesn't
muy
run it
único, porque
and
el
the local
Estado no lo
doesn't.
dirige ni
We
tampoco los
are
locales.
equal partners
Somos socios
in its
iguales
operation, its
en
decision
su
making,
operación, en su
deciding
toma de
what
decisión,
pilot projects
al
to work
decidir
on,
qué proyectos piloto
and
trabajar.
so you
Y
might ask yourselves, why
podrían
would
preguntarse
people
quizás, ¿por
get
qué las
involved?
personas se involucrarían?
What you have to do is demonstrate the value that they get by
Va-
doing so. By
Obtenido
being
al
part
hacer
of the
aquello. Al
open
ser
water
parte
data
entonces
community,
de la
simple
comunidad de
access
datos de
to
agua abierto,
information that
tendrán
will help
acceso a
them
información que les
make the
ayudará a
decisions that
tomar las
their
decisiones
institution or
que
their water
sus
sector
instituciones o sus
needs to make.
sectores de agua necesitan tomar.
And since Kamyar so
Ya que
expertly covered
Kamyar, bueno,
the
ya
people side of
cubrió
that equation,
la parte
I'll
de
cover
personas
a
de la
little bit of the
ecuación, yo
technology
trataré de
side of the
cubrir la parte
question,
tecnológica de la
or
pregunta
the data science side. I think
o la parte de
there's
ciencia
some
de
clear
datos.
steps that can be
Creo
taken.
que
We
hay
learned
pasos claros que se pueden
a lot
hacer.
from Australia
Aprendimos
and the
mucho de
work they did
Australia
10
y
years
el
ago to deal
trabajo
with
que
their
ellos
water
hicieron
data
hace 10 años para
integration
trabajar
problem across their
con
whole
su problema de
continent and
integración de datos
multiple
de agua
interviews
en
and
todo el
discussions with
continente.
the
Múltiples
Australians led
entrevistas y
us to
discusiones
believe
con los
and
australianos nos
afterwards
llevó a creer
I
en
first
un
set up an
camino
ideal
hacia,
water
bueno,
data
primero
model
hacia
for
establecer un
public and
modelo
private.
de
So
datos
if
de
it was
agua
water
ideal para
use,
el
the
tema a
cost of
referir.
public and
Si es
private
uso de agua
reuse.
a lo largo de
There are
entidades
also examples of
público-privadas,
what a data
hay
model
ejemplos
or a data
de lo
standard
que una
model
norma
should
de
be.
datos o
Standard is another way
modelos
to think of a data model.
o estándar de datos
And making use of that as sort of like your center goal in letting data sets either
que los
aspire
sets de
to become into
datos
that data
sean
model or
aspirar
transform into that
hacia
shape,
ese modelo de datos y
or
convertirse
to
hacia este,
encourage it with a
o
little
de
stronger
estimularlo un poco
regulatory
más
authority that
fuerte.
can
Si
make
es que
it
tiene autoridad
sort of
regulatoria, podrían
transform
hacer
into the right data model.
transformar
It's a really
el dato
critical
hacia un
step
modelo
because,
adecuado.
as
Esto es
you
un
probably
paso
all
crítico,
understand,
ya que como
making
podrían
different data
todos
types
entender,
work together
hacer
on a
diferentes
one by
tipos
one
de datos
basis
trabajar
is
en sí,
extremely
entre
laborious
sí, en una
and
base de uno
reproducible.
hacia uno, es laborioso y
Again,
no
principles come to
reproducible.
mind, and so
Los
there's some tools out there
principios de
besides
justicia
looking at
vienen.
Australia and
Hay
some
herramientas
principles,
más allá que ver
findable,
Australia y
accessible, interoperable,
asequibles
and reproducible.
interoperablemente y
I think I got those right. Those are really important to sort of bake into your process. We
hacia
also
el
have a great
final del
example in
proceso.
the
También tenemos un
Western
buen
United
ejemplo a
States
seguir
called the
en
Western
Estados
States Water
Unidos
Council
del
Water
oeste,
Data
llamados
Exchange.
los
They've
consejos de
adopted this sort
Estados
of public
Unidos
data
del
model
oeste y el
to bring
intercambio de datos. Y ellos
water-based data
han
and water
adoptado este
rights
modelo
data
para
across
traer
the Western US
datos de
into a
derechos
common
de uso de agua
application or data
hacia una
model.
aplicación
So
común y
there's some
modelo
great
único.
examples out there of
Así que hay
using that
grandes
sort of ideal
ejemplos
data model
existentes de
as a
usar este
center
modelo de datos
guiding point
ideales
and
como un
putting
punto de
that out there
centro
so that the
guía
data
y
arrives and starts to
presentarlo para que los
be
datos
interoperable. So
lleguen y comiencen ya
that's
a ser
a really new
interoperables.
option that
Esta
is
es una
very
opción
technical.
muy técnico que se ofrece.
Gracias, Kemia, Greg. Mauricio
Thank you,
nos queda
Kamyar and Greg.
1 minuto, nos
Mauricio, we
queda,
have
hay
1 minute.
algunas preguntas
I
que nos
don't know
podría
if there's a
Greg
final question we may ask our
desarrollarla
speakers,
cada uno
maybe
nuestros
to
minutos
each
o
one to give it,
complementaria.
what, 2 minutes
La
maximum of
pregunta
a
es, ¿cómo
comment?
se ha
The
centrado
question is,
el manejo
how
de la información
has
hídrica
water
para ayudar
information
a la
management
pequeña
been
mezcla de
centered to
pequeños
help
productores?
small
Por ejemplo, en el
farming
Valle de Napa.
processes like in the Napa Valley?
Podríamos partir por Greg y
We
terminar
could
por
start with
Kemian.
Greg and then finish with Kamyar.
That's a work in progress. Our agency does.
Trabajo en progreso. Nuestra agencia interacciona con predios pequeños y granjas en general. Interactuamos en una base de datos de derechos de uso de agua y el ecosistema está sufriendo un esfuerzo de modernización masiva, así que creo que al final de este habrá mejores interfaces para nuestros diferentes grupos de usuarios. Estamos tratando de hacerlo un proyecto igual para que nos enfoquemos en usuarios que tengan impactos más vulnerables a las decisiones que tomemos, no tanto acceso a tecnología, es una forma de trabajarlo y en calidad de agua tratamos de hacer el menor impacto posible. Somos los reguladores, sin embargo, y debemos fiscalizar, así que el componente de datos es importante también. Y lo que yo podría agregar con lo que Greg les ha compartido es dos temas. Uno es, como ustedes saben, llegamos al tercer año de sequía en California y nuestro departamento BWR están reuniendo un sistema de información de monitorización de sequía y este incluirá información para el estado completo que se pueda usar para crear decisiones críticas. Otra, en cuanto al Valle Napa y áreas de Sonoma, es el entender y tener un mejor entendimiento de ríos atmosféricos y el ser capaz de predecir por una semana por adelantado de cuándo se alcance puntos de fortaleza y nuestras comunidades costales que incluyan al área Napa comienzan ahora a operar o reoperar sus reservorios de superficie en anticipación a tormentas atmosféricas que ayuda a reducir riesgos de inundación y tomarán esta agua liberada ayudando a subterránea. Así que este manejo de agua para recarga es una estrategia que vendrá, que pueda involucrar e involucrará a los agricultores de California, ya que tienen mucho el terreno con capacidad infiltrativa capaz de absorber estos flujos de agua peak y que tengan y tener esta agua en las cuencas subterráneas disponibles para épocas de sequía.
Kemian, Greg, muchas gracias por las presentaciones, por las respuestas. Es una gran ayuda para el trabajo que tenemos en nuestro país en
Help
esta
the
materia.
work done for our
Esperamos
country and the
Mauricio que
subjects.
después Mauricio
I
también nos
hope
pueda
that
compartir la
Mauricio
presentación
and
en
UC
el
Davis could
que vamos a
share
tener
the
mucho interés
presentation and links because we will have great
mirarlo y
interest
en
in
revisarlo.
looking at it and reviewing it.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much
Mauricio,
for that.
nos vemos.
Thank you.
Mauricio, it
Cierra.
seems you close out.
Gracias, Oscar.
Yes, thank you very much, Oscar. Very interesting.
Nuestro speaker, a
Thank
Greg
you
y
to
a
our
Kenia.
speakers, Greg,
Voy a
Kamyar.
salir del libreto. Encuentro extremadamente
I'm going to
interesante
go out of
el
the
tema, más allá
script. I
de los
find
datos,
these
más allá de la
subjects
estructura de
very
base,
interesting. More than
base de datos, es
a base
el
structure
entender
and
que estos
database,
temas
it's
son tan
very
comunes desde el punto de vista
incredible to
más de
see
personas,
what
junto con Greg y Kemmer,
these subjects
que
are of
alguien
common.
ve los
And
números, otro ve las
someone sees
estadísticas,
figures
como
here
que
and someone
creo que
sees
eso
different point of view, I
muy
think.
interesante. Nosotros creo que
This is very
estamos
interesting. I
súper de
think,
acuerdo en esto. Hemos
Oscar, do you
trabajado en esto
agree?
por
We've
años
been working
en
on this
distintas
for years
instancias.
in
Creo
different
que es
instances.
realmente
And I
importante
believe
poder
that it
compartir la
is truly
experiencia que
important to
ya,
be able to
ya se ha
share the
vivido,
experience that has already
reciente
been
y antigua. Y como dijo
lived
antes,
through.
eso
So
les ayuda también. A ver, ¿dónde
we
fallan
see
los
the
errores
mistakes,
para no
how
cometerlos
where are the
nosotros?
mistakes so that
Bueno, muchas
we
gracias
do not
nuevamente.
make
Y
them.
ahora
So thank you
tenemos
very much. Once again, we are going to do a brief
luego pasar a
3-minute
nuestro
break
segundo panel de
to go to our
conversación.
second conversation panel.
En
It is
este panel
during that
de
panel,
conversación, también
in
vamos a
conversation panel, we
revisar una
will
encuesta.
review the survey. I remind you that you have to answer the survey left in the QR code. I don't see it on my screen, but it was at the beginning. As I said, 3-minute break. Let us go for some coffee and bathroom break, which has been common of these webinars, that we forget that we still have bathroom needs, even though we are online. Here's the QR scheme. And thank you. And we remind you we will have the participation of the Minister of Public Works, Alfredo Moreno, at the end of the session. So we will be back in 3 more minutes. Thank you very much.
Bueno, bienvenidos de regreso a la
Welcome
segunda
back to our second
parte del
half
Summit Water Centralized
of the summit,
Management. Bueno,
Water
esta
Data
vez
Central
con
Management.
café, con
And
baño, como les dije,
we've given time for a
ahora por
coffee
supuesto
and
interesante seguir
bathroom. And
hablando,
after this first interesting
más
part,
interacción además,
we
más
will
diálogo
see more interactions, more
en esta segunda
dialogue
parte
in a
con
second
buenos e
part
interesantes
with the
panelistas.
new and
Y
interesting
ahora
panelists.
dejo con
And
ustedes
now I leave you
a
with
coordinar esta segunda parte
whom will
a Pablo
coordinate the
Silva,
second part, Pablo
integrado,
Silva,
coordinador
in
de
part and
agua y water
coordinator
resources
of
de
water
nuestro centro.
resources of our
Pablo es la
center.
persona que realmente sabe del
Pablo is the
agua
person whom truly
y
knows
coordina
about
estas
water.
actividades. Y por
He
lo
is
menos
whom
además de eso, que
coordinates
además
the
Pablo
activity, and it's
es
also worth saying that
exalumno,
he is
conoce
an
también
ex
el
UC
tema, no
Davis
solamente aquí
alumni, and he knows
desde
of
California,
water
sino también
coordination in Chile, but not only
desde
there,
todo
but also
Norteamérica. Y
other
les dejo
places.
con todo
Pablo,
el público para ti.
I leave you with the audience. The audience is
Perfecto, pues muchas
yours.
gracias
Thank you
Mauricio por
very
la
much.
presentación.
Perfect. Thank you,
Muchas
Mauricio, for your
gracias Greg por
presentation.
este espacio,
And
esta
thank you
oportunidad
for this space and
de
opportunity
conectar con el panel
of
anterior,
connecting
con
with
la
the
muy buena
previous
presentación
panel
que hizo Greg
with the good
y Kamyar
presentations offered by
de la
Greg and
realidad en
Kamyar
California desde la
of the
perspectiva del manejo
Californian
de datos
reality from
y la
data
generación de
management point of view
información para la toma
and
de
the
decisiones.
generation of
En este segundo panel vamos a
information for
tener un
decision
muy
making. In this second
interesante
panel,
grupo de
we will
conversación,
have
una
an
panel de
internet
conversación
interesting
que
conversation
circunstancialmente
panel
voy a
ready,
tratar de realizar en
which
español.
circumstantially we will do in
Translation
Spanish
can be
with
accessed by clicking
English
on the red button
translation, which is
available in the
accessed
virtual
at the
room.
red button available in the virtual room.
Pero de ahora en adelante, al
But
menos la
from now
conversación en
on,
el
at
panel va a ser
least
en
the
español.
conversation in the panel will be
Lo
offered in
interesante, vamos
Spanish.
a revisar
What's
algunas
interesting, and we will
aprendizajes
review
y
some learning and
aplicaciones
lessons
concretas de gente que
and
está en las
concrete
manos del
applications of
terreno
people whom are in the field
realizando
doing
levantamiento de
these
información y
information
abordar los
raisings
desafíos que
and
tiene
approaching the
la
challenges that
gestión de los recursos hídricos
managing
desde
water
distintos
resources
roles
may have from
y
different
cómo esa
roles, and
recolección y
how this
generación de datos,
data
información,
generation of
proceso
information
y comunicación
of the process
de
and
la información que se
communication
genera
of the
permite
information generated
aportar valor a la toma de
allows
decisiones
to
en
offer value
diversas
to
esferas.
decision making in
Hoy día nos
different
acompaña
areas of
desde
influence. Today we
California
are
José
joined from
Pablo
California
Ortiz-Partida,
by José
científico
Pablo
climático de los estados occidentales para el
Ortiz. He is a
programa de clima y
scientific for
energía
the
de la
climate and
Union
energy
Concerned
programs of the
Scientists.
Union of Concerned
Alvar
Scientists.
Escriva-Bou,
Alvaro
investigador
Escriva-Bou, whom
principal
is
del Centro de
main
Políticas del
researcher
Agua del Instituto de
of the
Políticas
Policy
Públicas de
Center of
California,
the
el PPIC,
California
por
Public
sus siglas en inglés,
PBIC
y Emilio de la
Department,
Jara,
and Emilio de la Jara,
gerente general y de
Hardwick, who's
tecnología
General Manager of
y presidente
Technology
además del directorio
and
de
President
Captaid.
also of the Captaidro board.
Para comenzar, le
To
vamos a pedir a
start,
cada uno de
we
ellos
will ask
que en
each and every one
5 minutos
of them
se puedan
for in
presentar
5 minutes
y
to present
contarnos brevemente
themselves
su
and
experiencia,
tell us of
su
their
formación
experience
profesional,
briefly, their
su rol
professional
dentro de la
formation,
entidad y la
their
empresa o
role
institución que
in the
representan.
company and institutions they
En
represent.
primer lugar, dejo con
And
ustedes
another
a José
question,
Pablo,
another
eh,
place, I
para que
leave you
nos
with Jose
cuente
Pablo so that he can tell
su
us
perspectiva en
from
esta
his point
interesante
of view
conexión que existe entre la
the important
tecnología, la
connection
gestión de los
between
recursos hídricos y la sociedad,
water
las
resource
comunidades
management,
vulnerables y el
society,
rol que tiene la
vulnerable
ciencia en
communities, and
buscar
the role of
cerrar esta
science
brecha.
looking towards
Muchas
closing
gracias,
this
José
gap.
Pablo.
Thank you very much, Jose Pablo.
Muchas gracias, Tocayo.
Thank
Yo
you very
trabajo para una
much.
organización que se
I
llama,
work for an
como Pablo dijo, Journal of
organization, as
Concerned
Pablo said,
Scientists
that
o en español
Journal of
Unión de
Concerned
Científicos
Scientists
Conscientes.
or Union
Y mi
of
trabajo es hacer
Concerned
investigación sobre
Scientists.
cambio
And my
climático y
research
su
work
relación con el
on
agua.
climate change
Y
and
en
its relation
particular
to
yo me
water.
enfoco en cómo el
Particularly,
cambio
I focus of
climático
how climate
está
change
afectando a comunidades
is
vulnerables.
affecting
Y a
vulnerable
comunidades vulnerables me refiero a
communities. And
comunidades
to these,
rurales,
I refer
comunidades
to
de bajos
rural
ingresos,
communities,
comunidades de
low
inmigrantes,
income communities,
comunidades de trabajadores
immigrants,
del campo aquí en el Valle Central de
field worker
California
communities of the
también,
Central
por
Valley
supuesto,
of
comunidades que no hablan
California,
inglés.
and also communities that
Estas
don't
son
speak English.
comunidades que
These are
experimentan
communities that have
inequidad
lived
respecto al acceso de agua
inequality
potable.
regarding the
Y un
access
dato que
towards
muchas
drinking
personas
water.
no
And
conocen
data that people
es
sometimes do
que
not know of
en
is that
California,
in
aún siendo uno del
California,
estados más ricos del
even
mundo, el país
being
más
the
rico del
richest
mundo, al menos en términos
country
económicos,
and state of the
existen
world,
cerca de un
there
millón
is
de
around
personas que
1
no
million
tienen
people
acceso
whom
confiable
do
a
not
agua
have
potable. Entonces,
reliable
los Estados
access to
Unidos no son
drinkable water.
ajenos
Thus, the
a
United
este
States is
tipo de
not
problemas y en algunos
far
casos yo
from these
diría que
problems.
sus
In some cases,
inequidades son
I
aún
would say its inequalities are higher than even other Latin American countries. And the perspective that I wish to share with you is a bit out of normal. I wish to talk of data and information obtained through interviews and field work at the communities. And I began to do this work because if we wish to achieve sustainability, it has to be sustainability for all. So I will tell of the experience with these project types. 3 years ago, I stopped working on mathematical models to simulate and optimize water systems to work on social aspects and the scale of community. So in some conferences, I would hear that we developed the models and it was important to include the communities in these research projects. But when I ask people who has more experience, how can we include these communities? Then the general answer was, to be honest, I don't know, but we must and should include them. Thus, talking with a friend who had similar concerns as mine, we developed a project where we would interview and talk mainly with the people. And the idea is to hear by firsthand the needs of the committee's members. Thus, we were doing interviews and realizing that we knew quite less of what we did 22 interviews with a duration of 20 minutes and an hour and a half. These interviews initially were related to water entities, but during the interviews, the members of the communities would say, well, yes, water quality is quite bad. However, air quality is worse. There's no public transportation. There are no parks. There's no trees. There's no public spacing. There's no public seating. So here the environment is bad. So we had to adapt and expand our interviews to include other social, economic, and environmental inequalities so that at the end which affect unproportionately many of these communities. Many of these inequalities occur jointly in a significant impact in the daily lives of the community members. And another thing that we've learned is that even though communities share common challenges, many of the problems identified were specific to local level. Thus, policies at state level are not sufficient or can skip these details. And to conclude, it would be excellent in the same way in which we centralize much of the rainfall technical data and basin flows to also centralize data from people perspectives through, in this case, California and also and American countries to have all of this information, which is so rich from their members and of the directly affected people by water issues. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias, José Pablo.
Thank you very much, Jose Pablo.
Y ahora es el turno de Álvar
Now,
Escriba-Bou para que
Alvar
nos pueda contar también un poco
Esquiva-Bou's
el rol
turn
que cumple
so that
el
he can
Centro de
also
Políticas
show
Públicas
us
del
the
Agua
role of the
dentro de
Public
PBIC
Policy Center in
que tiene
in
una
water of the
misión bastante
PBIC,
especial
whom
conectar
have a
investigación
special mission
científica
which connects
rigurosa con
rigorous
problemas
scientific
complejos de
investigation
política
with
hídrica.
complex
Y en
issues
ese
of
puente
water policies. And in
que se
this
establece entre la ciencia y las políticas
bridge
públicas,
established between
un
science and public
intermediario. En este
policies,
sentido, creo que es
there
muy
should be an
interesante poder conocer la
intermediary. And
experiencia
I think it's
que Álvaro
interesting
nos
to know
cuente
of
de
the
primera mano del
experience, and
trabajo que
Alvaro tell
realizaron hace
us
varios
in
años
first
ya
hand
en
of the
California en
work
ese
being
sentido.
done years ago in California in this sense.
Gracias, Pablo, por la
Thank you,
introducción
Pablo,
y
for the
muchas gracias a
introduction,
los organizadores, a ti,
and
Pablo,
thank you for the
por invitarme.
organizers
Es un gran
and
placer estar
for
con
inviting
ustedes,
me. It's a pleasure to be here with
compartiendo
you
ideas y
and
también
sharing
aprendiendo
ideas
de
and also
todos.
learning from your
Pues
experience.
básicamente yo trabajo
Well,
por el Public
basically,
Policy
I
Center
work for
con
the
el Centro
public
de Políticas Públicas de
policy
California
of
desde
the Institute
2015
of
y
California since
llegué antes a
2015. I
California, fui
came
parte de mi
to
doctorado
California to do my
en civil
doctorate in civil
desde
engineering.
2015
And
trabajo
since
aquí.
2015, I've worked
El rol del
here.
instituto,
The
la
role
verdad
of
es
the
que para
Institute,
mí
to be
llegando desde
honest, for
España es
me,
un poco complejo
coming
al
from
principio de
Spain, is a
entender,
bit
pero
complex
lo
in
que
the beginning
nosotros
to understand.
hacemos
But what
es
we do
tratar, como tú
is
decías,
to
de
try,
hacer
as
una
you've said, to make
traducción o una translación
a
de toda esta información
translation
científica,
of the scientific
sobre todo para que
information
los
specifically so that
tomadores de decisión,
decision
políticos,
makers,
para no hablar
political
solo de estatal,
decision
sino también
makers,
locales,
not only
puedan
state
tomar
but local governments
acciones
make
de una manera informada y
actions
con información
in an informed fashion with relevant information and scientific rigorous information. To be honest, work, we are basically the majority of us is almost like academics because we work a lot on research, but instead of trying to publish paper research, which we do, our largest focus or goal are the decision makers or the people who do public policies. And it is for them that it becomes important to particular subjects. First, we have the subject of becoming a credible source, as we say here, where people, decision makers trust, and this is done with continuous contact. We sometimes think you cannot just come and hope that people will listen just because a good article was written. You have to prove for long periods that after rigorous research, and people can trust you to help them in the issues they may have. To people, I refer to the decision makers, and so that you can also base them on your studies. On the other hand is communication. It becomes essential and easy. I like to say that public scientific papers. So we have to reach them through other channels of communication, thus the blogs and thus the policy briefs and the very summary articles, 10, 12 pages, depending on the complexity level, where you can translate scientific information to a concrete public policy. And it is also becomes important with this instinct, which is on upon complex political issues which are at the order of the day to mark in the agenda what are the important issues. There's often in the political conflicts where information managed is not relevant or very biased. Thus, what we try to do is to support with objective information. For example, the water use in California. Taking public data, we could say these are the sectors that use water. These are the moments that water is used. From here is where the water comes, and these areas have most conflict. Another subject that's interesting that we do is to sit down at the table with everyone. We are a nonprofit organization without profit goals. Thus, we try to sit down or not sit down, but we sit down with all of the different actors, with different agricultural actors, with producers and urban zones, with urban agencies, with local politics and organizations like social justice, as commented in by the smaller communities and representatives of small communities, and also environmental actors, actors that can, and by placing everyone at the table for debate and discussion, you begin to create connections of empathy among the groups, and you can discuss things that can be obtained at the end or results that are potentially beneficial for all. Apart from all of this, which is how we do so and what we do as a we have public financiation, public grants like other university. So we are an academic agency where we can also apply results, but we also have private funds in the States. Philanthropy is quite common. Thus, there are regions and donations where money is given. The condition that we place is that we aren't a consultant agency. We don't receive orders of what to be done. It's we whom choose our schedule, and it is dictated by the subject that we and our board of directors believe would be the most important for the future of California. And with this, I think I've extended it much. So I hope to have more questions and we can talk of more concrete issues of the projects and to talk of more aspects,
Muchas gracias, Álvaro,
related
por la
aspects. Thank you,
presentación.
Alvaro, for the
Y en
presentation.
tercer lugar,
And in
Emilio de la
third
Jara,
place, Emilio de la Jara,
representa a la empresa
whom
Capta Hidro,
represents
quien lleva
Capta
también
Hidro
varios
Company,
años
who
trabajando
has
hacia
been several
redactar
years working
disposiciones
in the
artículos
field,
circulares
raising
de
information and
la llamada
participating
modernización de los
actively in the
sistemas de vigilancia
modernization of
y
the
organizaciones de usuarios de
surveillance
agua en
boards
general en
and
Chile y en
organizing
nuestro
water
país.
users in general in
Y
Chile
desde
and
esa perspectiva, dejo con ustedes a Emilio también para que haga una breve presentación de su trabajo.
brief presentation of his
Bueno,
work.
muchas gracias Pablo y muchas gracias
Well,
a
thank
todos
you,
los
Pablo, and
organizadores
thank you,
del evento. La
everyone,
verdad es
to
que es
the
un honor
organizers
estar
of the
acá
event. It's an honor to be here
conversando de este tema tan
talking with
importante, ¿cierto?
such an important
Un
subject
poco
with
como
you.
introducción,
A bit
bueno, yo
as
soy
an
uno de los
introduction, well,
cofundadores
I
y
am one of
organizadores
the
de Capta Hidro.
co-founders and general manager of
Capta
Capta
Hidro nos
Hidro.
dedicamos a
Capta Hidro,
desarrollar
we dedicate ourselves to
tecnología e
developing
implementar proyectos de
technology and implementing
telemetría,
projects of
automatización de
telemetry,
compuertas y software de gestión integral de
automation,
recursos hídricos.
and water
Nosotros a
management
eso le
information
añadimos
software. And we, by
estamos
2018,
desarrollando unos sistemas
were
de turbina y
developing
descubrimos que
turbine
todo
systems
sistema
and
de telemetría y
discovered that
automatización
all
sin
automation
implementación,
telemetry
acá en
system,
Chile
its
al menos,
implementation in Chile
había sido
here
muy difícil,
has been very difficult,
principalmente por temas,
mainly
digamos,
because due to
geográficos, culturales,
geographic, cultural
del acceso a la
issues
tecnología, pero también de la tecnología en
and
sí.
data
Entonces,
technology issues, but also
nos metimos en
technology
este
issues
tema
specifically.
con
So we
mucha
got into the
observación,
subject
digamos,
with a lot of
y somos varios
passion,
que venimos también
and
del
it's
mundo
several of
más
us
rural
who come from a
de
more
Chile,
rural world of
y
Chile, and
logramos simplificar cómo se
we've
hacía
been able to
anteriormente la
simplify
telemetría.
of
Antiguamente se
how
hacían unas
telemetry was
grandes
done.
estaciones con
Usually
estoy hablando de
stations
zonas
were
chilenas,
made,
tenían que ser con
but
unas rejas y unas obras
it should
civiles
be
que
done
tenían
with
tiempos de calma un poco similar
fences
a lo que
and
existía en
make
otras
it a
partes
bit
como en
similar
nuestro
to
otro.
what other parts
Pero
exist
la
like in
realidad
Europe.
pasaba que
But
las
reality had it
rejas
that
eran muy caras,
it was too
era súper
expensive,
costoso, los pozos de calma
and
empezaban a ser muy
also
poco
with
prácticos porque
sedimentous
tenías que
rivers, it
mantenerlos
became impractical because we
realmente
had
muy
to
buena
clean them
calidad
out
y una serie
constantly.
de
So there
problemas
is a series of issues,
tecnológicos que nosotros llegamos a resolver con
technological
un
issues
sistema
that we had to
que
solve
patentamos, que es
with
un sistema de
issues
telemetría que
with
incluía
a
el
patented
tamaño
system,
de
a
una
telemetry
caja,
system that would include all of the
del orden del
box
tamaño de
size
un televisor antiguo.
of
Después el
around
tema de
a
la
TV
automatización de
size.
compuertas,
Then
dimos cuenta de
going
que en
back
realidad
into
no tenía mucho sentido
door
para
organization,
automatizar una
we
compuerta
saw
tener
we
que
didn't
destruir
have
obras civiles que se han
to
demorado décadas
automize
y a
these
veces
gates, we had to
siglos
destroy some public works that would
en
take
construir.
decades and centuries to
Entonces
build upon.
desarrollamos
So
un
we've
sistema,
developed a
una serie de sistemas
system,
electromecánicos para
an electric
automatizar
mechanical system
las
to
compuertas
automate
y que se comuniquen de manera
these
móvil
and
con
to
nuestras
have
redes
them
de telemetría.
communicate modularly
Posteriormente
from a
tuvimos
telemetry
otro, bueno,
system.
todo el tema
And then
conversando
on
con
our
muchos
software
expertos,
and
con
talking a
muchos de
lot
nuestros
in
clientes, nos
field
dimos
with
cuenta
many of
en
our
cuanto al
clients, we
software
realized that
que
in the
existían
software
muchos silos de
part,
información.
there were a
Entonces
lot of
empezamos a ver que
information
si estos
silos. So we
silos de
said,
información, no, porque
why
cada
were they?
proveedor tiene su propio
Because each
sistema
supplier
informático.
has their
Entonces
own system.
nos
So
embarcamos en el
we
desafío de un
went
software que fuera
into developing a
absolutamente
software
agnóstico a
that
los
was
datos, que pudiera centralizar
completely
la
agnostic with
mayor
the data,
cantidad
where
de
we
datos
could
posible para
centralize
realmente poder
the
hacer
most
una
amount
gestión
of data
integrada.
possible to do
Entonces, desde el
the work.
2018
So
hasta la fecha
since
tenemos
2018 to the date,
proyectos desde la
we
cuenca del
have
río Limarí,
projects from the Rio Limari
Ñuñoa, pasando por
Basin,
prácticamente toda la
flowing
cuenca
through
hasta
practically
el
all
río
of the
Tocopilla,
basins up to
en el
Rio
oeste del
Cautín
estado.
or
Para
Cautín River in the
una
south.
zona como
So we
alrededor
cover
de 1000 kilómetros
an area of around a
de
thousand
nuestra repartición al sur.
kilometers of the
Acá en Chile, en
central
México,
north and
tenemos
south in
un
Chile
equipo
and
instalado en
Mexico.
Baja
We
California
have
y
a
esperamos
team
ahora
installed in Baja
varios
California,
otros estados
and we
más en
hope
México.
to be in
Y también
several other
estamos viendo otros proyectos también en California, en el Valle de Sur de San Joaquín,
south of
Fresno,
San Joaquin Valley,
viendo en otras
Fresno,
zonas de
to
California,
looking at other
en donde nos dimos
California
cuenta que
zones
toda
where we
esa
realize
simplificación
that all of
que
these
hicimos, toda esta apertura de los software
opening
y
of
toda
the
esta
software
simplificación
and
para pasar de
technology and all
datos
the
a información
certification to
de la
go from
manera
data to
más
information
simple posible,
in the most simple
realmente era tremendamente innovadora ya
was
incluso para
extremely
California, que
innovating,
tenía
even for
tecnología muy avanzada.
California, whom had very
Entonces,
advanced
hemos
technology.
estado súper harto en
So
terreno,
we have
escuchando
been
mucho a la gente,
in the field,
organizaciones de usuarios,
hearing from people
y vemos
and
en el
user
día a día
organizations, and we
lo
see in the
difícil
day
que ha
to
sido
day
poder
how
ir
difficult
avanzando
it's
en el
been to
paso a paso
advance
que se tiene que
in
hacer
the
para
step by
realmente
step work to be done to truly reach good standards to adapt to this water scarcity that has come to stay. At least in Chile, the reports are of similar characteristics. But to be honest, it is a global issue, and we are motivated by the purpose to accelerate the world towards a sustainable use.
Gracias, Emilio,
Thank
por
you,
la
Emilio,
presentación
for
también.
your presentation.
Se emitió una encuesta al
And the
principio
survey was
del
given
seminario.
in the
Vamos
beginning of the seminar.
revisar
We
los
will
resultados en
look
este
at the
minuto
results
para
now
poder
in
orientar
this
la
minutes to
conversación de
orient
nuestro
the
segundo panel.
conversation of our second panel.
A ver, se están apareciendo en este minuto los
We have
resultados.
at the minute the results coming in.
Y bueno, como pueden ver
And
acá,
well, as you can see,
el principal desafío
the
de
main
generar información
challenge
útil
of
para el manejo del
generating
agua es una
useful
pregunta
information for water
bastante abierta.
management, it is quite an
Y
open question,
principalmente la respuesta
and mainly the answer that
que hemos podido
is
levantar es la
been
hídrica,
raised
casi con un 40%
and appears there with almost 40% of the preference is to achieve covering territory, diversity, and geographic zones. This is one of the main challenges. Since the answers are quite shared, there is also regarding professionals that process and analyze the data generated and can be transformed into useful information. A small measure would be to achieve public-private information balance, and finally, a 7% would be social representativity for generation of public policies. It is in this context and regarding the interests of the audience, I think it becomes relevant of what Jose Pablo proposes in at a minute. Something is to One thing is to raise information, generate indicators, central indicators on water management and access to drinkable water and the coverage of rural water. There's also a gap, which is the representation, which Alvar presents to sit down at table with all. And in this sense, science looks to close gap and connect societies with true issues that people may have. So it is in this role of science and society connection, how do we objectify data collection either through financing of the different directing roles that in some way direct this work, Jose Pablo. There are sometimes subjects that are difficult to objectify and to place more information beforehand instead of the current public policy. How is your work in this sense? Yes, thank you. It is very important that these be objective. Here, the difference are the scales managed. One is a scale of community and the other is the scale of the state. And it's important that with talking with the people, we are able to identify which are the most vulnerable communities and to begin with these first. Because often, more and more often, the space of inequality becomes larger. We begin to put in new technologies, more infrastructure that benefits the large cities and the communities that are vulnerable. This space has become larger, at least in California. Well, also Mexico were the areas that I know of. What is understood as a vulnerable community in California? Is there a definition that allows to establish differentiation? Yes, what I use is a tool developed by the government called Fire Screen, and they developed this tool to identify the communities. They call them disadvantaged communities, and they have four groups of indicators, main indicators. These are indicators regarding the exposure of this case of the people who can be exposed to water quality issues, 2.5 articles, ozone, diesel emissions. Other groups of indicators are the environmental effect indicators that have to do with what are the threats and risks to subterranean water and what are the impacts to close surface water sources, and also how close are the also a group of indicators which refers to as how sensitive are the populations that we talk about. And here we have indicators of how much asthma cases may exist or groups with cardiovascular diseases. And the final indicator are more social economic indicators. And these have to do with the levels of education, percentages of disemployment, and certain poverty indicators. So here, an index was made which takes all of these factors into consideration to determine which are the disadvantaged communities in the state of California. And I can place a link in the chat box if someone wishes, for those who are listening and wish to go, it would be excellent for them.
Muchas gracias. Y en ese
Thank
sentido,
you very
Alvar,
much. And in this sense,
un
Alvar,
poco conectando también con la
connecting a little bit
pregunta
to the
planteada al
question made
principio respecto a la
regarding
representación territorial y de diversidad
territorial
climática, que
representation
es bastante
and
transversal desde
climatic
California a
diversity, which is
Chile,
quite transversal
con
between
un
California and Chile,
lluvioso en
with
California, un sur muy seco,
a
pero con un movimiento y una
rainy north
conectividad
and a
entre
dried out,
infraestructura
but with infrastructure
que en California
connectivity,
está bastante
which in
desarrollada hace
California is
años
quite
ya, más de
developed for
50
several
años,
years, more than 50 years of
implica desarrollo de
development,
infraestructura.
and with
¿Cómo se
their
conectan esos
infrastructure development. How
desafíos
do you connect these
respecto a la
challenges
generación de
regarding
información con la
information generation
representatividad territorial
with
de esos
Earth
datos y las
representativity of
políticas
the data
públicas?
and public
Tratando también un
policy?
poco de conectar con lo que
Trying
decía
to
José
connect with
Pablo,
what Jose Pablo
de
has
que todos se
proposed,
vean de alguna manera
where all
representados, no
are
solamente
seen
las
represented,
comunidades, sino
not
los
only the
distintos
vulnerable
sectores,
communities, but the
agricultura,
different sectors,
servicios
agriculture,
humanos,
the urban
ecosistemas con
services, and
infraestructura fuerte en
ecosystems,
California.
which are quite strongly seen in
Pablo. Sí, es
California too.
una
Thank
pregunta
you,
muy
Pablo.
interesante y te
A
voy a
very
contar un
interesting
poco
question.
con
And
un
I
poco de
will
historia.
share
En el
a bit of
2012,
history. In
2012-2016 hubo una
2012,
gran sequía aquí, más
2016, we
fuerte que
had
en
a large
continentales, aunque duró un
drought.
par de años.
We
Lluviosa y
still haven't
prolongada.
recovered
Después
after several
de
rainy
esta
years.
sequía,
But
estuvimos
after
trabajando en un
the drought,
proyecto
we
durante
were
un par de
working
años
for several
en lo
years
que
more
llamamos
in
contabilidad del
what we
agua,
call
cómo
water
medimos y un poco
accountability,
también
and
relacionado con
how
lo
we
que
do
estaba
a bit
comentando antes
related to what
Greg
was being
y
mentioned
Kamyar.
before by Greg and
El
Kamyar.
tema,
The subject
una de las cosas que
is
vimos
that one of the
es que
things
durante la
seen
sequía del
is that
2012-2016
during the
los sistemas de información, aunque
2012-2016
California,
droughts,
como decíamos,
this
es uno de
information
los
systems, even though
sitios del
California is
mundo,
one
posiblemente
of
el
the
sitio del mundo
places
con
of the
más
world,
tecnología
possibly the
en
most technologically
habían
advanced
fallado.
places of the world,
Y el problema
had
de
failed.
los fallos
And
de
the
los sistemas de
problem of
información no se basaban en
failure
los
and
sistemas
information loss is not
individuales
happening
de
on
información. Es decir,
individual
lo que
information
estaba
systems.
contando
In
también
other
antes
words,
Emilio, ¿no?
what
Decíamos,
Emilio was sharing before, we have
agencias muy avanzadas
agencies,
tecnológicamente,
very
hay
advanced
recursos
agencies
impresionantes.
where there are
El
impressive
tema es
resources.
que
The subject is that
los sistemas de agua de California son muy
the Californian
descentralizados.
water
California
systems are
tiene más
very
de
decentralized.
1.000
California has more than a
sistemas que
thousand
tienen competencias de agua.
systems that have
De hecho,
water
diría que
competencies.
varios
In
miles, si
fact,
contamos
several
pequeñas
thousands if
comunidades,
we
ciudades,
consider the small communities, cities,
distritos de riego,
and
muchísimos
irrigation
sitios, ¿no?
districts,
Entonces,
many
el
of them.
problema que vimos que
The
fallaba fue
problem
la
that we
conexión,
saw
la
was to
conectividad
fail was
entre esos sistemas de
connectivity
información.
among these
Muchas veces
information
cada
systems.
agencia de
Often,
información
each
maneja su propia
information agency
información de forma
manages their own
compartida,
information,
son agencias
do
privadas,
not
muchas
share
de ellas,
them. They are private,
que
many of
manejan
them are
una parte
private,
pequeña de
whom
información.
would
Lo que vimos
manage
es que
a small
si
part of the
fuéramos
information.
capaces de
We
alguna
saw
manera
that if
tener
we
un
were
registro
capable of
común donde
placing a
los
common
agentes pudieran
registry
compartir
where
información,
these people
información que
could
no es
share information,
de
information
alguna
that
manera
is
privada o que no les
in some way
importa
not
compartir,
private
simplemente cómo me gestiona
and do not
al
care
final
for its sharing, of
si
how
está
it
afectando a otros
influences
sectores
me at
que
the end,
están
or if it's
abajo
affecting other sectors,
de mi
or
sector,
if
¿verdad?
it's downriver
Ese fue
from
uno de
my
los
specific
fallos.
sector.
Otro fallo de los
These were
que
one of
vimos
the court orders. And
es
another we
que
saw,
básicamente hubo dos sectores que se vieron
there were two
mayormente
sectors basically that were
perjudicados durante la sequía
mainly
y está pasando lo mismo en la
affected during
agricultura
the drought.
tristemente.
And the
Y
same thing is
fue
happening
las
this
comunidades
year. It was the
desaventajadas, como estaba comentando Pablo,
disadvantaged communities,
y
as
el agua
Pablo
ambiental,
commented,
lo que sería
and the
el agua para
environmental
usos
issues,
ambientales.
which would be for
Y
environmental use water.
aquí podíamos hablar de
And
los
here
sistemas
we can
de,
talk
de las
of
falta de
the
representación
lack of
en las tomas de
representativity
decisiones.
in decision
Las
making.
comunidades
Communities,
desaventajadas nunca han tenido una
disadvantaged
representatividad
communities
hasta
had
los últimos
representativity
4 o
of
5 años donde
to
se ha
basically the
puesto
last
mucho
4 to 5 years
énfasis, ¿no?
where a lot of emphasis
Básicamente
has been
antes
placed,
no
but
habían tenido mucha
basically before
representatividad, entonces
they
la toma
didn't
de
have much
decisiones se les tomaba poco
representativity.
en
Thus,
cuenta
decision
o al
making
final no se
was
sabía
not
dónde
considered,
eran políticas
or
públicas que al final
public policies were
estaban
unknown,
afectando esos
usually,
impactos de
and were
representatividad.
usually affected by
Una
these
cosa bastante
communities.
similar ha
Something that
pasado
is quite
con
similar
el
has
agua
happened
ambiental.
with
Hay
environmental water
muchos
issues.
defensores de temas
There are
ambientales en
many
California, ¿no? Pero
environmental defenders in California, but to be able to be taking actions, harsher actions during a harsher drought like 2012, 2016, water at the end would be rerouted, and it became easier to bring water to the cities that were in complicated states or the different irrigation districts that justify this water use in such deep drought conditions. What we've been talking about after the drought and after 2016 is first that we have to place on these information systems and help in the hierarchy and the connection of these information sets. And this is what Greg Gearheart is working on in his water board. And also to, I've also worked with them greatly, and they've done very large steps in the last 4 to 5 years in integrating information. And the second part is the integration of representativity of public policies, is what Pablo's working. We've also worked it greatly in adding with objective information. What are the issues that we are causing? What are the issues that we cause, depending on different type of public policy point of views? Now, there's a quite serious issue of the last years with the drought that we have now, where we increase a lot of water pumping for irrigation, which on one side is logic. We also use subterranean levels to try to counteract the reduction of these, but this is affecting small communities. The subterranean levels are dropping and some are even going dry. So what we are offering is information. We work greatly on information. On one hand, to know of the what economic impacts exists for agriculture by these policies, and also quantifying and pointing out where these impacts may be found to anticipate these impacts in the smaller communities and mitigate them before they happen. In other words, to make policy and say, well, we will pump more water because we have a drought, but before that, we will avoid someone to not end up without water due to the same reason. Thank you very
Y ahí
much.
conectando un poco con la realidad
And
local de
connecting a bit
Emilio,
with the local
siempre
reality,
los últimos
Emilio,
años se ha
I
venido
don't know if you
implementando
in
en
the last
Chile
two
la
years have
reglamentación del
implemented in
monitoreo de
Chile
extracción
this
efectiva, que su nombre no es
regulation
casualidad,
of
es
effective
monitoreo
extraction, which is not
efectivamente de lo que se está
casuality. It's
extrayendo y te
exactly
permite
that,
aportar
the monitoring of
información
what's
para la
being
planificación
extracted
de
and
la calidad
allows
del uso y del
planification
uso de agua
information
en la
which allow
planificación, sino
water
que en cuanto realmente es la demanda y cuánto es
how
realmente
the
lo que se
true
está
demand is and what
utilizando en
is
distintos
being
usos, valga la
used
redundancia. Entonces,
in its
me
different
interesa que nos puedas contar un poco la experiencia en lo que es implementación de tecnología en esa línea y
implementation along
cómo
this
el
line
rol de la
and
tecnología
how
hoy día
the
tiene un
role of
papel
technology today
predominante
has
en
a
aportar
predominant
información a
role
los
in
tomadores de decisiones
offering information for decision
en esa
makers
línea, tanto a
along
nivel
this
público
line,
como
both
privado
at a
de
public and
usuarios.
private level of.
Perfecto, muchas gracias por la pregunta,
So
Pablo.
thank
La
you very
verdad
much
es
for the question, Pablo. To be
que
honest, is
es
that
una pregunta
it is a question
que siempre es difícil. Yo
that
creo
is
que
always
incluso en lugares
difficult.
como California,
And
que
I
tienen una
think in
reglamentación de
places like
tecnología
California
muy
who have
importante, este
technology
tema,
efforts of importance
porque
continue to
es muy
be important
necesario.
because it is very necessary.
El agua es un recurso que tiene
Water
una
is a
característica
resource that has
exclusiva. Si yo cojo
exclusive
un producto
characteristic. In other
producto
words,
de
if I use
concentración de
it,
masa,
there's
entonces
mass
esto lo hace ser
conservation.
un
This
recurso
makes it a
que es
resource that
extremadamente
is
importante
extremely important
medir para poder optimizar.
to measure, to
En particular,
objectify,
nosotros en las
particularly
organizaciones de usuarios
not only in
trabajamos
user
con muchas
organizations
grandes,
that work with
pequeñas,
many
medianas.
large,
Acá
small,
en prácticamente todo
mid-sized,
Chile, el centro
here
norte,
practically in all Chile of the
eh,
south,
nos hemos dado cuenta que
we've
existen
realized that there are
motivaciones internas, por un lado,
internal motivations on one
que
hand,
vendría siendo como mejora
which
la
would
gestión,
be
realmente
to
gestionar
improve
bien
management and
el
to
agua que nosotros
truly
estamos teniendo dentro de nuestras
well manage the
redes.
water that we are consuming
En
in our
otro caso,
networks and
la
etc.
dimensión
And
mayor,
also,
que es lo que
as you
nosotros
mentioned, which is
desde
what
la Dirección General
is
de
being
Agua
demanded
a muy
by
corto
the
plazo,
general water
dependiendo,
department
dependiendo de
in
la
certain
región,
date,
distintas gradualidades,
dependent on
para,
the
dependiendo de
region,
la
so
cantidad de
that depending
extracción o
on the
extracciones
amount of
de las fuentes naturales,
extraction of
poder
natural sources,
enviarlo de
can
manera
send
automatizada
it
o sistematizada y
automatedly
transparente
in a
del agua
central
desde la Dirección
form
General de Agua, que es lo que se da
transparently
de monitoreo
of
extracción
water
efectiva.
circulation data
Entonces,
for effective
en ese
extraction.
sentido, es
So it
súper
is in this
interesante ver
sense that it
cómo esta
becomes very
revisión
interesting to
interna
see
de los
how this
sistemas de agua
internal and
pública
external
hace
force
apuntando exactamente lo mismo.
build towards
Te cuento que
exactly
esto
pointing towards this.
súper
Thus,
particular.
it is very
Nosotros
particular.
trabajamos con la Junta de Vigilancia y
We have
Terremotos
worked with the Rio Mapocho surveillance, basin surveillance group, and we had a lot of data. We have it at the ski centers installed, and also at the different drinkable water centers, and there's another center that still have agricultural use. So we saw that the need of being all on the same page regarding how much is extracted from the river and it is transferred on one hand internally, even though there is conflict because everyone knows to objectify the problem if someone is based upon their what they what would correspond to them through rights will be able to be done. A more online analysis can be made, pictures can be made, and the pictures be recorded and registered so that they are there always. So technology should be proportional to the level of awareness of an issue that exists. Thus, in Chile, according to our experience, there is huge variability of different organizations with different types of professionals involved. There's no standard or no equal standard for all. We work from small surveillance boards, from small water runoffs to the huge basins of the rivers. So we've realized they are whom daily are in the organization in water and hydrologists and climatologists that look at waters, but what truly have to be managed is when water is scarce are the user organizations. So I have seen that towards the future, at least in Chile, we will go at least some steps behind with the adoption of technology seen in California, but I've seen a great leap forward at the level of awareness of how important data is and automation of data centralization from several sources for decision making. So what I wish to share is that for those who want to go and study this, go to California because water scarcity is not just a recent issue of the last year. It has come to stay. So we are very motivated to resolve this issue if it's a subject that is difficult. And even though for the next generations, it is of great importance to be considered for all societies. I don't know if I was able to answer the question perfectly. I think with these words, the challenge of information integration and decision making and objectifying water availability on one side, not only on availability among users, but also the available resources for all, including environmental assignment issues in the ecosystem where not only the environment exists as a national park, but also as society we can integrate into this ecosystem. So with this, I would like to thank participation. It gives us to talk greatly and longly. It's a subject that personally very passionate about, but to be able to close in a timely fashion and close the event, we will now go towards the presentation of the Minister of Public Works, Alfredo Moreno, to give us his perspectives of the relevance of information and managing data and water resources. Thank you very much to the panelists for their intervention and support in this water data management summit. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por
Thank you
nuevamente.
much once again.
Como les anunciamos
And just as announced before the break, I leave you now with you all, with our Minister of Public Works, Mr. Alfredo Moreno, whom will deliver to us his perspective on the relevation of information in water data management and in design policies of the government to face drought and water scarcity. Thank you, Mr. Minister. The floor is yours. Well, thank you very much. I greet everyone who is present in the seminar and thank the organizers. It is of the greatest importance. The subject that brings us together, Chile is one of the most affected countries of climate change, particularly by the amount of drought it brings us, and not only just one event, but something that is permanent, and also the participation of universities that have lived through similar situations, like the Californian case, and who have other scientific advances and are of great importance. Also, the three subjects that the seminar has been selected to be mentioned are truly and hit the nail on the button. It's information. There's no way to solve the issue if we don't have good information, if we don't study and truly analyze what we have. And second place, it's the subterranean water. Subterranean water are more, offer some data of what happens with some of our subterranean water sources. They are more and more the source where usually the source used to be superficial, but as these drop, more and more drop, and we are using more and more subterranean water, and we don't have a legal framework. We don't have participation from users, nor the necessary care, nor in legislation, existing legislation as considered to control the good use of subterranean water in a sustainable fashion. I think sustainability is the word of the day in subterranean water use is key then. And well, finally, the subject of climate change and drought, where we've had in the last time all of these debates globally of how to stop this and reduce this. But truly, from a Chilean point of view, I think the word of the day is, and I would wish for it to be the central message to leave you, the word that we have is adaptation. We're talking about mitigation of climate change, of how to avoid the temperature rise or how climate changes so acceleratedly, but we will have a small effect, 0 point something percent of the greenhouse effect gases. Chile is doing the support of developed countries. There are very few developed countries that are doing Chile's support, but it will not stop. We will not stop climate change ourselves. And we know that this process will continue to affect us for a long time. And as I will show you, this all indicates that this will be a process that will be continued, and thus adaptation is the key word in as better and quicker to done, it's better. So I first wish to start by showing the size of the subject that we have in hand in Chile. This is something that is affecting the central north and central south area of the country. We have 80% of Chileans living here. We have practically 80%, close to 80% of our product there. And if you look at what has happened in the different basins, here I choose Copiapó, Elqui, Maule, but we could consider any of them. The last 2 decades, here we have the decade of the 85 to 95, and then 95 to 2005, then 2005 to 2015. The three bars there, you see that in all the basins it has decreased, and if we see an average, is that what happens a little bit more, others less, but an average more or less. In 2 decades, we're at 80% of rainfall that existed in the previous basins. More or less, water has dropped in the last decades, 10% every decade. Graph at the right shows what happens in the last decade between 2010 until this year, 2021. While the drop of the last decade has been more accelerated and more pronounced. This is measured in Quinta Normal, Santiago, but I could have placed Valparaíso or any of the places that we have the basins on the right, a drop of around 40%. And we've gone from drops that came from some time ago of 10% per decade at a drop of 40%. This decade has also had, by 2019, the driest year of the history of our country since its register ever. We've also had 12 following ever in Chile's history have we've had more than 4 years of drought. The cycles for drought, we never had a cycle that extends more than 4 years, and we're at 12 years. This is our 13th year of full drought that is affecting us, a completely historical aspect like occurring in the north hemisphere with areas of drought of more than 20 years. Thus, this is what is affecting the world, and Chile is being strongly affected in this place, as I've said, where the majority of Chileans live in. And to say that additionally, this has made that in the last decade lived is the driest decade in Chile's history, not only 2019, but if we take of all of Chile history, it's the driest decade ever. And here in this such broad area of our country, in other parts of the country, the situation is different. For example, in the far north, we have the predictions are for more rain. But in this area, which I've said, which is the most relevant in population and activity, this would be the fundamental effect of climate change. This is what has happened. What can we expect towards the future? Well, a first way of seeing of what will happen towards the future, there are multiple models of climate change. This graph, as I've said, is an aggregation of all of these models. You can see areas which are in blue or green. These are areas where the models, what they show us is it will rain. Climate change not necessarily means that there will be less rainfall in some areas. There are areas that will have more rainfall and others less. And in redder or more brown areas are the areas that will have less rainfall. Additionally, the intensity of color show us the degree of agreement that exists between the different estimates and in the graph we could see the central north and central south areas of Chile. Uh, Brownish color of intensity of a darkness hue, which means there's great coincidence. And we could practically say that all models for climate change of ours, where the central north and central south Chile will continue to have more temperature and less water in the years to come. In other words, the process that we have been living towards in the past of rainfall drop and temperature increase, which has accelerated in the latest decades, what can we expect towards the future is that this process continue and this change be accentuated in the years in the future. Since as you can see in the rest of the country, our conclusion, we can see some blue points in the north. We see the double of rain. The issues usually seen are of rainfall control because it rains very little, but that double rainfall makes the altiplanic winter to have high risks produced in some cities of the coastal area who have a lot of living and dwellings built upon whom consider dangerous areas. And in the south of country, we also estimate there's less rain, but less probability of the central north and central south area. This is what we can expect towards future. Now, also summarizing this information, it seems to me that what we have is that this is a completely new scenario that we've had historically in Chile. We have climate change, which is expressed very clearly in a lower amount and low water availability in a broad area of the country where 85% of the population lives and 72% of the product is found, and where our answer can't be others because we can't mitigate the change, we can't avoid it. What we need thus is to adapt ourselves to change and to be able then to live with a completely different climate that we've had in each of the regions. And this challenge of adaptation Humanity has been able to adapt very well. Humanity has been moving from one place to the other in the world all along the millennia, but the adaptation processes are long. They are studied for millennia and even longer periods of time, which allow man today to live in the desert, in the tropics, in areas like in the austral or southern regions. What we don't have in the history of humanity are adaptation processes at the speed that we're talking about. The challenge that we have of how to make this adaptation of a process that we do not control, which will occur, or all of the available information says that this will happen, and this requires decisive information because it is action that has to be made in a very short period and thus requires action. It is not something that we can just wait for, and it is also a permanent issue. It is not a drought. What we have is that possibly in May next year we will not have a drought, and but it will be just a very quick spring rain. It will be something where, but the trend indicates that will continue on to the drop. There may be some variations, but we will be very mistaken if we believe that the condition has changed. And in third place, with a view of the country, because obviously it's a challenge of adaptation. What generates is generated are very conflicting situations. Water, economic losses, strong economic loss, migration, particularly, it's occurring all over the world strongly here, and the only way is to face it in a collaborative fashion with a country point of view. And if we face and expend our energy with internal struggles among ourselves, we will not be able to, with quality, overcome the issues. What have we been doing? Well, there are two presentations where we are acting fundamental, which is to face the emergency. Today, just to give an idea of the degree of difficulty, not only is there issues in supplying a good irrigation of the fields or to have problems in rural drinking water issues that we already have, and here are the more key points found. But today, to have water in Santiago, what we have had to do is redistribute water to bring water whose rights belong to farmers whom used to irrigate with their water, which was already low, and an important part of that water to fill the El Yeso Dam and to have enough water for Santiago. A few days ago, we had finished not the intervention, but we had to intervene the whole Aconcagua, 100 kilometers. All of the Aconcagua surveillance boards would intervene to be able to offer water at the Aromo Dam and to offer water to the Valparaiso area. We have this unfortunately, we continue with intervention to redistribute in the different sections today. But this is the level of emergency. We've had cities of minutes away from rationing, thus all of the large droughts that Chile has had in history, and as I've said, have never overcome more than 4 years and never has had this level of depth. We've all had rationing and power rationing. This we have 12, 13 years without rationing yet in Chile, but this is thanks in part to these emergency measures and some of the works that I will mention that have been able to be built with quickness. Obviously, the long-term works will be mentioned and how we manage this and manage the emergency. Well, the priority, obviously, the continuity of supply for human life and mitigate the impact of drought in productive aspects. Government has several in the Ministry of Public Works through the General Water Department are the scarceness decrees. These decrees allow us what we've said to redistribute water without considering what the pre-existing water rights are about, but to privilege situations for human consumption or ecologic care or activities that may have a large impact and redistribute the best way possible the existing water. Today, we have 172 communities that have a scarcity decree. We're talking about half of the Chilean communities are found in a situation where It is the authorities that are looking towards and seeing how we redistribute the low amount of water that exists. In second place, we have the emergency decrees, something managed by the Ministry of Agriculture. That is to help the small farmer, which is today affecting 228 communities. So even more than what we have here, the impact on small farming is huge. We've also had to change our monitoring and control when water becomes scarce and more valuable. Obviously, the bad behaviors in water use increase, and thus we have to work not only as well organized in superficial waters, but are completely disorganized with subterranean water sources, which I imagine is a point that is to be talked about in the seminar. This is a complete lack that we have today. 3,500 organizations of superficial water, and we have 14 or of these in subterranean water. And the main caregivers and the main people who do the work of using water well enough and distributing correctly and caring for people whom are served water and take water without rights are the user organizations, even before then the controlling companies. But these are a very small amount, and you will never be able to find or will take too long to find a well or water extraction for amounts that go further than what has been usually established. Those who know most about this are the neighbors who share a subterranean source, but whom today do not act in the same way nor care for the water. So we are supporting for the creation of user organizations of subterranean water, which are key in our understanding. We've also incorporated technology today to improve efficiencies in monitoring control, not only the people who will look and see. In other words, today we use satellites. Satellites measure vegetation the rights offer and to compare with this comparison of where the amounts of water came from if there's not enough rights. So here we use drones to look for water sources that may come, these sources that are not registered, and naturally this helps us that when the inspector comes in, has all of the information, necessary information, and knows specifically where to go. And also to say that today, we have working today in many of our communities the measurement of effective extraction of subterranean water. All wells have to have a flow meter, and these must be immediately measured through telemetry for the general water direction. We instantaneously know how much in the wells are being extracted, the intermediate ones done every month. There has to be a registry. This has to be done starting with the regions and the places who have most conflict and issue, but finally will be extended to all communities and all places where there is subterranean sources that are being in restriction or have a supply issue. Second, more than just the measures of the emergency in the sense of applying these redistributions and supporting those who have issues, of controlling correct minute to minute water use. Together with this, we've also increased investments in a way of having new water sources and better care and storage available of water. The highest investor of the government in the subject is the Ministry of Public Works through hydraulic works. In the last 3 years, this investment has been multiplied by two. There are the figures. We were around $330 million per year as a public work. Last year, this year, we did 660. Next year, the budgets are 771 million. So we will have 2.5 the amounts we had before, and this is significant change. Additionally, we have to keep in mind that this is the whole of the country. When we go to the affected zones, to give an idea, the most affected zone regarding rural drinking water and the highest impact in the Valparaiso area, while in Valparaiso, and the investment in rural drinking water infrastructure has increased by 5. In general, it's by 3, but in the critical areas, we have had an increase by 5. So we have some places where we've had constant investment, but also an increase because the issue exists. And in average, we have these 2.5 issues. And in the case of the APRs, 3. But in the places who have higher issues, the amounts for growth are around 5 times. On their behalf, through the sanitary companies, $700 million have been invested for climate change and new works, which are new drinkable water plants, more tanks, interconnection between weaker areas and more and areas with better supply of the different cities. For example, in Santiago, to bring of what comes in through Maipo and Mapocho, which is weaker, and in the end, new water extraction, new subterranean water extraction sources. Here, there's a large amount of works carried out, some already working, some that are about to start to work, that give additional support and continue to support because they are always not enough. And finally, in agriculture, we've increased the normally technification of irrigation. If you look at the central north area, the technification of irrigation is almost close to 100% here. But in central areas, there's still a lot of work to be done. Here, you could save half of the water practically, and thus there is important growth to consider, and resources have been multiplied for this. But this is in the emergency. The solution of it all requires adaptation, as I've mentioned, towards a process which is permanent. It is not an emergency of today that will be fixed with just an extra well or will be fixed with redistributing water in a specific fashion, and next year it will all end up being perfect. That is not the solution. The solution requires an integrated solution in which I think for the first time in Chile, for this process, we've considered that this is a true permanent issue and process, and which thus requires us an comprehensive solution of the issue. The National Water Table was created with people of all sectors to face this as a country vision. We have all public policy sectors present, but also user types, academics, all of the people whom have something to support with have been able to do so. Even though we've had a year and a half working, it has been very important for many of the things that I will mention. And I wish to mention some of the things that point towards the same. What's first is a fundamental, which I would say is in the essence of what you will do in your first session, which have to do with information specifically. Our base, our subterranean water levels have very little information to them. In Chile, there's information that is very dispersed. Parts of the change to be made in the new Ministry of Public Works and Water Resources has to do with the information management and availability for all information that is easy to be used. But independently, all of the solutions for water issues have to be seen at a basin level. Moving water from one basin to another becomes very difficult, and if it's done or usually done, usually have marginal effects. Thus, what is very being interesting is to look at what is the solution so that we know what the sources of water are, what sources of water exist, what are the uses that exist, how we will evolve towards the future, what is the scenario for climate change. And it's true that Chile has 101 basins. There are no other countries that have 101. If they are, they're very few. Some have 5, 7, 10, but not 101. Chile has 101 different issues, and each one of them require each one's factors analysis. So what is done is to study each of the Chilean basins where our intent is to have it studied and modeled. What is the relationship between subterranean water, how much is infiltrated, what is the relation with superficial water, and which also allow to know, facing each one of them, things to be done towards the future, what the impact it could have. And also to have 61 of these 101 done for 2022. In other words, next year, which is 90% of the issues, because these are the larger basins. The larger issue, the basins that have larger issues and the one being forgotten are the ones that have less issues or are the smaller ones. We have 17 finished studies. We have 34 that are in develop. So this is in full work. We've done the first presentation then in a region that was in the Maule because the idea is that for it to be of use so that it becomes this modeling, this information so that the community, by the community and local authorities can agree on a strategic plan at several of what will be done in the region in that basin to solve problems and issues. This for us seems to be a vital day. It's like trying to solve an issue blindly or with a candle. The only way to truly solve an issue is to have the information to know what the elements that are in play, and you may have differences in opinions, but you can't have different data. So you can have a discussion, but on elements that are shared of what the reality is about. This is a bit strategic plans and included in a subject that I will talk about in a minute that have to do with the new water code to come out. This was proposed by the executive, accepted unanimously by Senate and the Chamber of Senators. Thus, the new water code, all basins have to have a current water management plan, has to be renovated and updated every 2 years as a maximum, and thus we ensure ourselves and thus advance. At the moment that the water code is approved in a month or 2 months tops, we will have the main basins developed and soon to have them ready. And thus, this will not only be in law, but also for the first iteration of the first plan of each of the more relevant basins it will be at. And thus, this allows that each basin have a plan of how we will solve the issue that we have facing us in a better fashion for that basin, for each sector of the basin, what the aspirations the community has, and how to achieve water resources. For that, second place, this naturally requires works. And particularly when we talk of long-term works, we are talking about works that may require many years. We, many people would say to us, and I am going to make a comment on California, many people would say to us that what Chile had to do was the same as California, invest in a huge amount of fantastic dam systems like California has the same climate, mountain range, close to the mountains, the same issues, but are better off than us because they have a fantastic damming system. But as in Chile, to do a dam just to comply with all takes 15 years to complete. And in the practice, none of the ones that are being built today or are being advanced have less than 30 years. Thus, that's history. So we make contact with main aspects of California and we talk of the network and we proposed, among other questions, this issue. And we said, well, how many dams were made in California? Well, if you achieve today at least 40 years minimum, but how if it takes 40 years to have the dams you have? Well, it's simple. We have these because we did them in the 60s, and in the 60s it was easier to make one. So today, further than what you like or not, today it becomes very difficult to do large works. What have we done then? What we've done is to try to do a prioritized damming plan. 27 that we are all being studied and advanced upon. The first to have the authorization to be completed, and it is built immediately. We are doing 4 currently reservoirs, and we have 6 that are in the last stage of study, and we have advanced practicability, and it will be several years. The only way is to push several courses so that the one that crosses the range is the one that is built. Desalinization. Today, Chile is triplifying its desalinization capacity, and this will be accelerated. This is a very good solution for the zone, particularly north and central north zone, where there's no other water solutions are all different. This is a good solution when there is another sources, no sources of water. It maybe it's too expensive, but it's a solution that's very adequate, which or are coastal, where the large populations are at, and no energy or money is spent to take water too far, but to be used in mining, which cannot be moved around. So we could produce the same product in other places. Sometimes it becomes more doubtful and has to be cheaper so that it is of generalized use. Of course, there are other specific things that may have a specific condition to them. The use of wastewater, treated wastewater, has an advantage in the subject. Chile practically does treatment of all of its wastewater from the cities, but we still have 22% of these waters which only have primary treatment and which go through collectors and submarine emitters go into the sea. In other words, it's water that we could still intercept in different places and have an additional treatment and make use of. This is a subject that we are strongly pushing in that you will see in the next years and possibly announced in the next months of how that water today reaches the sea. This water will begin to be used, and probably some that goes into the rivers too will have better uses or changes in their use. But the issue of wastewater is of great advantage, and today with the scarcity that exists becomes something relevant. These waters with secondary treatments are perfectly apt for agricultural use, industrial use, and which even may be retreated once again. It's not the idea, but even for human consumption. But we have to use this water before having more water to be used. The reloading of subterranean waters, we have a simple economic method to have subterranean reservoirs and where several of the plants in the Maule region show us interesting solutions for a region that has broad subterranean levels that may depend on the subterranean sources for important flow, but to become sustainable in the efforts require a reloading of the level and also the controls that I mentioned, which are from the north. This has to become by the norm and regulation framework. First, because we can't solve this issue with a norm and a law where the half of Chileans and more consider unjust or not adequate. They consider as not equal. We need to have a law that moves this, that consider it as practical and reasonable. So we've dedicated efforts into a new water code to support this. Thus, this is a completing issue. We've in the Senate been able to unanimously approve a new water code, and today is in the mixed commission with few points of difference to be debated upon, and thus I think finishing the elections now next week, this mixed committee will begin to function. But I hope in some of the sessions, in few sessions, we could cover the few, and we need a water code which is practically unanimous, which is radically changed from 2 years ago. The second, a water code that is adequated to today's situation. See that the code of 40 years ago, the subject the subject of water consumption, even though not as expressed, is in the code, but we have to do it in the scarcity levels. But what about Not that the code was off, but the concern of society at the moment regarding the issues was minimum. Today, we've realized that it's vital to preserve nature, but also to preserve ourselves. These ecosystems are fundamental in water maintenance and preservation, both in its quantity and quality. And third, we have to adapt to the intensive draining water use. This means all of the activities that cover superficial use, which in all sense have had good treatment and very little changes in the water code of how distributed, how they are cared for and divided. But subterranean waters require huge changes. There has been a change in the water code that gives attributions to water fiscalization entities to eliminate, to reduce, and change the consumption for all of the use. Have a place where the water levels drop and the people say that there's a neighbor with avocado plantations and others with olives and others, and thus the APR system next door, the neighboring NPR system doesn't have water, but one have water. But you have a 20-meter well, and the other one has a 100-meter well. So there's no proportional distribution of water because one will be without and the other is not affected. This is what happens when the river drops. When the river drops, all distribute equally. Not. So today, the new norm, not only the water code, but as I've said, some modifications made some months ago. Today, the General Water Department, in situations as you've mentioned in a subterranean water level, requires a measure, while reduction of the rights can be made for affecting all of those who affect the aquifer. The seasonality is also an issue that has been debated. How is this renewed and managed? And it all it is. The higher attributions in monitoring and control, authorities need to have more effectiveness in what they must face in a more acute situation. Punishment of non-use. We've talked a lot of the rights that have been given, and you have to think of non-use. By 2025, we have non-use patents. This new water code will increase these patents greatly. The current patents have good results. There are many people, probably many people don't know this, but people, many have returned water right uses non-consultative. Half a million liters per second have been returned of people who do not want to continue to pay the license. But additionally, in this case, not only with the new water code, this increase in the amount of the license, but additionally, in some time past, certain years, the person has to give back the right. Since water is a national public use asset by all Chileans, while the person could do this and probably may decide that everything to be used is different. But if they don't use it right, well, what's logic and natural is that it is made available to those whom truly need it because it is a scarce resource where in some places and in many places I've mentioned we do not have. Then we also have other changes in the regulations that have to do with the creation of this Ministry of Public Resources and Water Resources that in the Global Bank several years ago, they've shown that this was the solution for Chile, a country that has 43 different institutions that have to do with water that do not have coordination among them nor leadership. An OCDE study of all the countries, all the member countries of the OECD that concluded that the is the most dispersed, less effective system of all of the countries of the OECD. And we have a huge amount of instructions to be said, but do not work together. Thus, we need leadership, coordination, which makes this project of law not only to create the Ministry of Public Works, but also creates the condition of minister that coordinates all of the ministries, because this will not change health, will have to say something about it. Naturally, agriculture will have to say something. Mining, engineering, it all has to have a say. But the point is that we all act in the same way. We consecrate what we've seen at the National Water Table, which has been of great support in creating the National Council to create a national public policy and to capture society or the society issues in the subject. And an important subject that you will see in your initial parts of the seminar, which have to do with information. This is something for the Ministry of Science, and what shows us is the analysis done in studies carried out that Chile produces a lot of information in water issues, which is too disaggregated and difficult to obtain. We have to obtain it from the diverse sources. It's not made upon the same basis, thus difficult to cross over and make conclusions from after adding several sources information. Thus, those who believe that the project is a project that will still be found in the ministry, and the idea is not to create new information, but to create parameters or way to unify the information and make it available to all private, public parties, academics, etc. Another point that has to do with the subject more at hand has to do with environmental care. I've mentioned of how it has changed in the world and our society, but I wish to say that maybe it's something that you do not know about, or some may not know about. Chile has 375 subterranean water sources. In 2018, there were only 6 areas of prohibition. An area of prohibition is an area where more rights can be given. So, said in another way, in 369 subterranean sources, rights were given so that people could continue to take water from these places. This is okay as long as this is sustainable, as long as what is being taken is less or equal to what is being brought in. Well, this requires study, and it's what we've done. Today, after doing the analysis, we have today, and probably this number will grow, we have 102 of the 300, a third then of the Chilean subterranean levels, or 30%, are found in prohibition. In other words, these are where more is being taken out than what's coming in, and obviously can't more rights can't be given for because there's no more water to be given. Together with this, we have an order of 80, 90, 100 others that are in areas that have been declared to be in words where they can only give provisional temporary rights, where water can be taken from, but if it is seen that this affects the subterranean water source, authorities can suspend the rights. These are not permanent, only temporary, delivered, continuously studied, and if there's damage made, it's eliminated. Thus, today, we have more than half of our country's subterranean water sources protected. And in other words, all. Why not to say? Because those are not in the condition, those who are not in the condition don't need it. But we can't continue to act upon different agro systems without caring for them. Agro systems are fragile. We need to care for them, and we need to take measures so that these ecosystems work together with us in sustainability of the. In other words, in other ways, we won't be able to we will do things which will be a disaster because our children nor our grandchildren will be capable of continuing the activities that we have and will wish to develop today. In the same way, we've created in the new water code what we call water use rights for use at its source, which is something that goes further than what the ecological basin is about. It is a concept where many people have proposed. There are people who ask for water to be able to do non-consultative use, others for agriculture, mining, or consultative use. But there are also people who need water to have a touristic site, to be able to do rafting activities, or to use the benefit of an ecological nature. It's a right It is a right to be delivered, that this right ends up at the source for this use, and which naturally is not transferable. We can't use nor sell them as others. These have specific use associated to them. It's delivered, and if the person wishes to use it in others cannot. Norms, secondary norms of water quality. This is something that we are advancing upon. Chile has primary norms. The secondary norms are being very few. First is the Villarrica Lake, where we've determined to overcome several of the levels of the secondary norm, and this will give origin of the indigenous consultation to the decontamination plan of the Villarrica Lake, and we will be able to see what will occur in each of these bodies of waters where this is occurring. It's the only way to be able to have water not only in quantity but also in quality. We're usually talking about how much water we have. Today we have serious issues in subjects of quality too. For example, we're having in our coastal areas saline inclusion, and the wells are lost. Other places we have an excess of chloride. In other places we have the action of man, like for the case of the Villarrica Lake, where this is producing that we are found over many of the factors associated with human activity, which is broadly developed around the lake. This will require a certain series of prohibitions through these basins. The protection of urban wetlands. You know the law, and this is radically changing the protection that is to come, which is being seen in Congress, where we have our glacier law of importance. We've also updated glacier information that does not exist. Chile has the majority of the southern hemisphere turberas, which are important in Aysén and Magellan. So we have important work that has to be done in parallel with the works and in parallel which has to be done together with caring for ecosystems. And I wanted to finally mention an issue which I believe has been become very important in the last months due to the acuteness of the crisis. First, because it has extended for many years, and second, because we have a coincidence of this something like this being permanent. This year, for example, we will probably have in the next months the lowest levels that we've had in history in many of the rivers of the central areas of Chile. Thus, without a doubt, we are more and more in more acute situations than what we are able to estimate. We have to do an estimate of things that will happen, and we are seeing that we are having situations that more acute than what we are able to see before. Thus, we have to also act upon other changes. And one of the important changes have to do with accelerating cultural change. How we care for and relate with water. How do we make people realize that when the person in the city opens a water tap and water, and when the prices have not changed or prices are cheap or sometimes drop because changes are every 5 years, thus the higher costs of the different sources are still not incorporated, how do we do it so that people use their water better? So here there are several points that I wish to mention upon very quickly, but to say that first we have to work with our children, with the youths. Children are the best so that they understand this and help their families and the rest of the people also do the evolution. And you know, many subjects of how children have been very important agents. And in second place, collaboration with large users. We've talked with the municipalities. Municipalities are large users in their green areas, in their buildings, in their schools, in their health centers, large water users. But additionally to these, they manage the public space. We've reached an agreement with all of the municipality associations to create a type of order which will be said to all municipalities so that all are adjusted to the reality, but to change how we are able to use public space in water issues. For example, it will not be allowed for people to irrigate during the day. They will have to do so in the morning or in the evening. We will not be able to wash our cars in public spaces if we're facing a place where the pavement is impermeable. So, how municipalities do this and in which type of vegetation plazas offer? We have to have more parks offered. We have to continue to do so of how what species do we have available today? What used to be native is today. What's native in Santiago is what used to be native of La Serena's agriculture. So we will have a conscious consumption campaign. We've done it in the previous month. Now in December, we will have a TV campaign so that people in their different sense can help through their daily lives of how they irrigate, how they wash their teeth, and in the care, you have to be aware that mm, water is being lost, and sometimes we aren't able to use it, nor the investments applied for some life. Finally, the efficient use in cities. We have very good standards in many things in the sanitary areas and in treatment, water treatment, and in the cities around 30 countries of the world where you can drink water of any city. We have wastewater treatments and everywhere. This has been one of the key points in increasing life expectancy in Chile. But we have very bad standards regarding the losses we have. We have a loss higher than 33%, which is what is called non-billable consumption, which is part of a relevant part of them are the losses network. Thus, we have to do investments. We have to have another technology and detect losses and act quickly and renovate the necessary ones. So here we are also working with all of the companies and institutions to have important changes in water to the city. Well, to finish, I just wished to show you what we have been doing and leave you with the central message that I've tried to transmit. The task of adaptation is the largest challenge we have, and we will be joined by it for many years. Governments will pass, elections will pass, but left or right, everyone will have to face this situations which overcomes many of us, and adaptation has to be done quickly, well done, and it must be done among all. Here, there's no magic wand. Here, there's no actor here that can solve it all. Can all do support here, and if we do it together and in collaboration, we will have better results. There are places that have less water than in the central areas of Chile, in fact, the north of Chile, but in many other countries and live very well, but are adapted to the new reality. And the exercise to be done is how we adapt in each of the regions of which they have less water available than what we had years ago, how we adapt and how we can thus have the source, the form of relating to water and caring for water adequately adapted to the new reality and without complicating adaptation processes. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope that what we've commented here have been of great use. And thank you for the seminar because without a doubt, it is of great support to the work that we are doing.
Muchas gracias, ministro. Muy
Thank you,
interesante su
Minister.
intervención, de
Very
verdad.
interesting
Inclusive
information given to
con su
us.
presentación
I
además
think that
tocó
in your
varios temas
presentation,
que
you've also
fueron
mentioned
señalados
several
por
of the
diferentes
subjects that were pointed out
comentarios hoy día
in the seminar
en
as
estos puntos
important
que
and
hubo destacados
where you
panelistas
had
y
noticeable
contribuyentes
panelists
de
and keynote
California,
speakers
pero
from
también
California mentioned to
fueron
us, but
hartas
also
preguntas del público y
from
opiniones que
audience
surgieron
questions and
la conversación, la experiencia
bringing the
que
conversation and
llegamos a
experience to
uniones
where we
entre
wish.
la teoría, la
There's
tecnología,
a
la
bond, a
práctica
union
y como vemos
between
muchas veces dentro del seminario, el
the
factor humano,
practice,
¿verdad? Cuando uno
technology,
se
and
empieza a engolosinar con los datos,
the
con la tecnología,
human
olvida que hay
experience
gente.
to coordinate
Aquí hay prioridades
aspects
que son
for people.
humanas
Here we
y
have
eso hay que
priorities
tenerlo
which are
bien claro.
human, and this
Yo
has
creo
to
que
be very
muchas
clear.
veces
And I
en
think
este
often
seminario
here
nosotros
in this
los
seminar
académicos
specifically,
abordamos el
as
tema
you
del
said,
data
we
management
cover
y
the
cómo
subject of data
nosotros con la
management of
tecnología
how
podemos
to
ser
do
cómplices
data
y podamos hacer que eso sea
management
posible.
which is very difficult sometimes with impossible type of data. Well, sometimes people more from the areas of letters, writing say language builds reality, yes. And people who are more into numbers say yes, but data validates realities or destroy them. So it's important to have information generate and transparent, reliable, timely information where we're all along the same basis of information, where we all talk about the same data. And once again, thank you, Mr. Minister. We end up with the challenge of adaptation. I think he hit the nail regarding the speed of adaptation. I am sure and bet, I haven't confirmed it though, that the technological development, thanks to Chilean scientists and world scientists, just like entrepreneurs from businesses, technology will respond to the requirements needed. I hope humans are at its height and are able to adequately, decisions made adequately are not too late. Thank you very much. We thank everyone and the speakers whom participated, Greg, Kamyar, Jose Pablo, Alvar, Emilio, to our moderators, Pablo Silva, our coordinator, UC Davis Chile. We thank the organizations that support us, also the Embassy of the US, the USDA, and this Chile Technological Consortium for Water of the Center South. Here we have the University of, please don't get mad at me, and mainly the Ministry of Public Works through the ministry, but also the General Waters Work and the Ministry of Agriculture through the National Irrigation Committee, Corfo, ANI, and our digital panel, Centrum Eventos. We wait for you for the next event. The minister also did some propaganda that will come for December 15th, where the subject will be subterranean waters, and we believe it is an important subject which in California has lots of recent experience in implementation stages and how this has resulted. As I said in the beginning, with successes and mistakes, let's learn from the mistakes. And the registry of this event will be available in some days. Thank you very much for your participation. And we wait for you in less than a month in our next event. Thank you very much.